All right. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me. And I am sorry, we're starting just a little bit late. My apologies. We had a little bit of technical problems with me understanding what the time zone actually is. So, but we're up and running now, and we have a couple of guests with us. Just a couple of things as we get started, a couple of housekeeping things. Well, I mean, we'll go for, my plan is about 90 minutes, previous conversations have gone a couple hours. I got to set some kind of goal, so we'll say 90 minutes. But I've got a number of questions from the Laird Barron subreddit that I'll be bringing to the conversation. Already folks are making good use of the YouTube live chat, so certainly put your questions out there. If you have a question, a question specific to one of the stories and the beautiful thing that awaits us all, please just name the story as you ask your question, so we're clear on which story you're referring to. And then we also have plenty of questions related to the Croning as well. What an exciting time to be a Laird Barron reader. Our subreddit has added over 1,000 members in the last 3 years. We're really excited about that. We're about 1,070 as of today. We were like 62 about 3 years ago. So I think there's a focus of a lot of excitement about Laird's work, and we're of course thrilled to see that. And we've been really excited about the posts that our editorial teams come up with and all of the conversation going on. If you're not on the Laird Barron subreddit, join us now. And there are a ton of Laird Barron readers and fans out there. Also, Laird's Patreon. We'll mention this toward the end as well. Laird's Patreon has just grown and grown. There's a lot of activity. Laird's up there posting pretty much every day. So we'll come back to that a little bit later. But that membership's grown as well. But let's welcome our two guests. Of course, we got Laird Barron back to talk about these two books, and also special guest John Langan celebrating his birthday weekend. Happy birthday, John.
Thanks very much, everybody. It's great to be here.
And we've already got a good crowd on the YouTube viewing. I see, and by the way, I see the name Jack Haringa. Jack is here, and I know that's a name that you guys are familiar with from years and years ago. I see Julia Morgan, Kat Hargrave is out there, Jeremiah Dillon Cook. Lots of good folks have joined us. And then someone who is Gentle Reader is with us as well. So yes, great to have everybody. Oh, it's Bruce from the subreddit. Hey, Bruce, good to have you here. So Laird, how are you, sir? How are you today?
Oh, I'm great. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're really excited. We've got your new collection coming up on September 10. It is getting closer. How are you feeling about that?
Really good. I'm excited to see the artwork that Trevor Henderson is doing for it.
Yeah, if you folks haven't seen it, it's out on. You can see it out on Twitter. Go look up Bad Hand Books' Twitter profile, and you'll see the Trevor Henderson's illustration, his workup of the Help Me monster from in a cavern in a canyon, and it's just creepy as it can be. Trevor Henderson, you might know him better as Slimy Swamp Ghost on social media, at least on Twitter. He has a huge following. He's a big horror artist and has had work featured in the horror film Tarot recently. Recently. So that's a lot of fun. But yeah, it's very excited about having that book coming out. And
I'm particularly excited just because you never know how many books you have left in you.
Yeah.
And if this were to be the last book, at least I got to slander Paul Tremblay and John Langan one more time.
It's true. Having read the book, it is in fact true.
Or their likenesses.
My legal team has advised me not to respond until the papers are filed.
Awesome. Well, we can talk about more dark as well. John got worked up nicely in that, certainly.
I know. Everyone's
all kind of escaped on that one.
Oh, poor Thomas Ligotti. Ligotti gets off like nothing, whereas the poor John figure, his puppets get melted. Oh,
yeah.
That is an act of, oh my.
Michael Sisko is the interesting portrait is painted of him as well. But then Paul Tremblay and Nathan Ballingwood kind of get off easy there.
They do. They do, in
Yep.
fact. Yeah.
Yep.
Completely misread that story.
Well, we'll come back. We've talked about this story on past interviews, but I think there'll be a few more questions about it. How long have you guys known each other? When did you meet in person, and when did you first become aware of each other?
Oh my goodness. Well, we were published concurrently in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction back in 2001. I think I was in the July issue and Laird was in the August issue. That was my first published story, and I think that was your second published story, right? After Hour of the Cyclops.
Yeah, it was the first professional story. So,
and like I don't know, it might have been at the time that Laird's story was published. Gordon Van Gelder sent me an email, and he was like, "Look, check out this story.
Wow.
I think you might appreciate it." And but the funny thing is, I don't think I actually wrote to Laird until after what? After what was the second story?
Old Virginia.
Yeah. It might have been. I think it was after Old Virginia. I think I wrote you this email that was like
it was like after a promising start.
I was like, "Dear Mr. Barron, I had written to advise you to step away from the keyboard." We wrote back and forth these sort of very genteel, very formal letters of admiration to each other, emails of admiration.
Yeah.
And then it must have been. I'm trying to think if we talked on the phone. I must have talked on the phone a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then it was ReaderCon. I think was where we first roomed together.
I want to say 2006 or 7.
That's what I was thinking. It was 2006. I think.
6.
Yeah. And just at that point we staged a guerrilla reading because they didn't have reading slots for either of us. So we took over a room and convinced the hotel people that no, there's a mistake. This room is really supposed to be unlocked, and put up a sign for it and had a little reading in there. And before which, remember, it was the weekend of Pirates of the Caribbean movie opened, and we went to like a Chili's or something for dinner before the reading, and you put away I don't know how many shots of tequila or scotch.
It was a mixture of things.
Yeah, but
lots of both. And it started at the bar in the hotel, the Marriott, and well, actually, maybe it ended there. We came back and we were sitting there, and I remember Paul goes, "Hey, aren't you supposed to be doing that guerrilla reading any minute now?" And I went, "Yeah, I guess so." And I went to get up, and I couldn't really go there. And so you guys just carried. I remember you guys each put an arm under my arms. He said, "Just lean on the podium; it'll be great." And so I just draped myself on the podium and read.
It was a pretty good reading. Yeah. It was actually better attended than a lot of other readings I've done.
And that was also Michael Sisko couldn't get a slot that week either, and so prior to that, we had gone to his earlier in the day. We went to his reading. It was just astounding.
Yeah,
that's the first time I ever met Michael Sisko. I may have read something of his before that, but I wasn't really familiar with him. I was vaguely from the Nightshade message boards. I think he had his own board there.
He did, I think. Yeah.
Right. And so he was always talking about him and Lucius Shepard had their boards, and we were always on there. They were talking about movies and esoteric books and sex positions and things.
Yeah. Which you would not have expected from Sisko, but by God. Yeah.
By God.
Yeah.
But then so I finally met him, and the reading was astounding.
Do you remember what it was he read?
I don't remember the title of it. I remember, though, that it was about cosmic worms in the brain.
I wonder if it was The Genius of Assassins. That's
probably the one where he's an assassin, and
the son sort of cooks his or stirs something to life in his brain, activates something in his brain.
Parasite, But it was just that was a good weekend.
Yeah, and then after that, it was just sort of successive conventions. World Fantasy in Saratoga, which was when I think about it, we were there with Michael Shea.
Yep.
Wow.
Was Straub there? I think Straub was there, although we didn't.
Straub was
hang
at
out with him.
Straub was at. I was lucky enough to go to like at least 3 conventions that Straub was at, and I remember he was at ReaderCon, I think in 2007 or 8, one of those.
Yeah,
and we hung out with him, and that's the first time I ever met Peter Straub, and he was wonderful. I've had some great experiences at ReaderCon. ReaderCon overall, I prefer it to World Fantasy actually, just because you meet a lot of the same people, but it's quieter.
Yeah, it was. Saratoga was.
I was busy.
Geez, Shea was there, and Ramsey Campbell was there, and St. Joshi was there, and Cisco as well, and I think Paul
Willem Pugmire.
Willem Pugmire, yeah.
That was the one where I can't remember. It was kind of later in the evening, and a bunch of us. Joshi took a bunch of us to a hole-in-the-wall East Indian restaurant.
Oh yeah. We went to this, and he was sort of shocked that people liked Indian food.
Yeah,
and we're all sitting around the table there.
And then there was about at least 15 of us, and it was the people we mentioned. Ramsey was there, Joshi, and I believe his wife was there. Cisco was there.
Paul was there.
Yep.
Because remember Ramsey talking about Robert Aikman. Yep. And how Aikman had terrible teeth.
Michael Shea and Linda Shea were there.
Yeah. And there was, do you remember
he had a couple patrons there, Greg and Marianne, I believe.
In the corner of the restaurant, there was a great tree trunk that had been carved into this representation of I don't know if it was scenes from like the Ramayana or the Mahabharata or whatever, but it was all these sort of fantastical gods and goddesses and heroes and monsters spiraling up into the ceiling.
Right, because it was essentially it seemed like someone's living room.
It was a sort of smallish space. Yeah.
Yep. And like we're in someone's home, and they had set aside the dining room for guests, and that basically the 13 or 14, 15 of us that were there, that was all that possibly could have fit in there. And that was just spectacular. I was sitting there, and then afterward, it was you and me and the Shays, and then Gordon Van Gelder joined us, and we went to literally one of those bars that you see in every horror movie where there's like some scruffy guys playing pool.
Yeah.
And bathroom has graffiti all over it, and the lights are all the blue dim lights in there, and it's like something out of the 70s, this old just biker bar. And we sat around there for a couple hours and chatted. So that was I want to say it was 2007. That might have, I think.
Yeah, that was 2007, because I think Saratoga, 2008 we went to San Jose. I think
it was 2009 actually, but
was it 2009? So what was 2008 then? Maybe I skipped 2008. But yeah, San Jose was Shea was also there. Straub was there.
Mark Laidlaw.
Yeah, he was there too. And Cody Goodfellow, and the late and dearly missed Graham Joyce was there. We had dinner. Right. We had dinner with him and Sarah Pinborough and a bunch of writers who were published by Nightshade Books at the time. And Graham was obviously he enjoyed being the master of ceremonies, and he was trying to hold forth about how he had been to the Rosicrucian temple in San Jose, and he put on his American accent, and the man said, and we all stopped him, and we were like, what is that? And he said, well, that's my American accent. And we were like, what, really? And he was like, yes, it's my American. We were like, I don't know. And we asked like Sarah Pinborough to do an American accent. And of course, hers was terrible. And we were like, no, Graham, that's an American accent. And Graham was like, oh, fuck all of you. So, yeah.
Were you guys ever at a convention with Carl Edward Wagner?
No, I missed it. I think he was... When did he die?
95 or something.
95, okay. I think it was well before either of us had made our entry.
Him and Raj Zelazny. I mean, those are two people that if I times would have, basically they would have been able to hang on a few more years. I would have had a chance to meet them. I would have done a beeline to meet both of those guys.
Well, that's Saratoga. That Saratoga World Fantasy, Fred Saberhagen and Frederick Pohl were there, not long for this world, either one of them. And I regret, Fred Saberhagen, when I was a kid, was the Empire of the East and his
Berserker
swords books and the Berserker books. They were all spent a lot of time with them, and I regret that I didn't go up to him and shake his hand and thank him. You know, that's one of those things where I'm like, you were such an idiot. Charlie Grant too. I mean, he was alive when I think when I was starting to write anyway. I don't know if he was doing conventions though at that point. You know, that's the thing, isn't it? That so many of these guys that we grew up with, just for various reasons, by the time we were, you know, in the throughout the aughts, and after, when we were going to conventions and meeting people and so on, so many of them were just either they passed away or they were just not able to travel anymore.
Is there one like legendary convention that you guys and maybe Paul or Michael or other friends of yours went to that's just like you still talk about to this day?
We try to forget everything we did there.
No, that first ReaderCon was pretty great, but I think Necronomicon in 2013 was a really good, fun convention.
Yeah, we had some amazing times at Necronomicon, because you know, that first time Laird was a guest of honor, so he had this big suite that they gave him as a guest of honor. So he put me up, and did you
Bob
put
Waugh.
the late Bob Waugh up there as well? And
a bunch of Canadians hung out when
Canadians came and went. Yeah,
once those three, Strancis and Rogers and
I don't think Rogers was there. I think it was just Strancis and Gavin.
It might just been, but it seemed like he was there. He's kind of ubiquitous. But yeah, they won't leave.
They were like, they were just like, listen, it's our turn now. You came to our place a few generations ago. We're coming here. So we had to put up with them.
And Bob hangs out with a higher class of like strata of convention goers. You know, all of a sudden you've got Joshi lurking in the corners and some other publisher editor types who wouldn't normally come in, but you know,
all of the like the scholarly contingent.
Yes, the academic types.
Yeah, the academic
types. The tweed jacket crowd.
But that was mighty good. There was a lot of goodwill there. A lot of you know, at that point, Joe Pulver, in conjunction with Tom Lynch, had just brought out his Legati tribute volume and his King in Yellow tribute volume. So those were kind of sort of making their debut there, and a lot of those writers were there as well. Cisco was there again.
There were a bunch of young writers there that went on to do quite a bit during the tens or teens. Yeah. You know, like Nicolay and just a few other.
Nicolay was there. Mike Griffin was there.
Yeah.
Again, Cisco was there. I don't remember if
Adam French was there. So
you're right.
I'm sorry,
Aaron French was there. Yeah, he was as well.
But Pulver, but Kat and Joe were, you know, and that was cool to see them. So it was, and then a bunch of the publishers who do weird fiction publishing, like Centipede Press, was there, and you know,
that's
Jared,
right. Yeah, Jared was actually staying across the hall from us. It turned out we didn't realize that.
So there were some much wilder conventions, but that was really the last one I went to, except for I've gone to Necon a couple times. But Necon, I almost don't look at Necon as a convention, and no offense to them, but it's more like a gathering of friends.
Yeah,
it's
that sounds really good. Yes,
it is a convention, right? But it's not.
But it's one track of programming. They cap it at, I think, 400 guests.
And it's all people who everybody pretty much, and it's just like hanging out with a bunch of your friends at an open bar, and like it's not open bar, but I mean, you know, you're just hanging out and BSing. Where almost every other convention's a convention, and so the Necronomicon's the last one I've been to.
Real quick, I'm going to bring my co-host Edward up on stage. Hey, Edward, how are you?
Hey, Ed.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Hey. Good.
Thank you. And I get, I'm trying to keep my one foot in the world of printed fiction, and one foot in horror cinema as well. And of course, there's a lot going on in the film industry right now, with a lot of industry shifts and changes, and trying questions about where the money's really coming from, and theater versus streaming, and then the unions with the strikes that happened last year have caused a lot of concern among people who are just trying to make a living in that space. I wonder if you guys have a perspective just on where the publishing industry is, in particular in horror publishing, but I guess any kind of genre publishing. Does this, as a reader, it kind of seems like a golden age. There's so much stuff, really good quality stuff. It's being promoted to some degree, but a whole lot of that, of course, is authors out there on social media, going to conventions, going to touring with their newly released books, etc. Just wonder if you guys have a kind of a perspective on where the genre publishing industry is right now. Is it in a particularly good space, particularly shaky place? Any thoughts on that?
Laird, you want to take that first, or?
I don't think John or I are in a very good position to really opine on it, because our struggles and our successes are unique to when you get to a certain level in your career, right? We've been around a long time, so that's a double-edged sword. You become kind of part of the landscape, but so there's a negativity in the sense of you get overlooked quite a bit for the next hot thing. On the other hand, you're never short of invitations to anthologies, or in other words, you have a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I can't really speak to where we are, because I can only, I think everybody's path is so different. Just look, so whatever I'm experiencing is not what a new writer is experiencing by any means. But just looking at the weird fiction and horror, like small to medium press, I would say, just as a reader, there's a lot to read. I mean, there's, people do complain how hard it is, but I'm like, yeah, try doing it 20 years ago when you had to lick a stamp and type everything out. And then, so it was a lot more expensive. You waited months to ever get a response if you got one. And there were 5 places you could send that were worth sending anything to at any given time. Now it's, it's arguable how many places are worth, are going to help you, but there's a lot more than there used to be. And there's certainly a lot more accessible. I think the bar for entry is lower in the sense of money, output of money and time and energy. You can hit a button. And there's a lot of places that are championing, the champion of like novellas. You couldn't sell a novella very easily back in the aughts. I was really lucky to have sold some to the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. And I remember talking to Gordon about that, Gordon Van Gelder, the publisher, and he said, under 7,000 words, let's say you have 100% chance of publishing because you sent me something really good. Okay, under 7,000 words, you've got that 100% chance. Over 7,000 words, now it's down to 50%. Over 10,000 words, you got like a 2% chance.
Wow.
Even if it's good, even if it's something that he loved. I mean, I'm just paraphrasing him. The numbers may be slightly different, but the point was, he said that essentially trying to place anything longer than a few pages gets, almost exponentially harder, more difficult. Well, these days, there's lots of publishers that are publishing longer fiction, chapbooks and novellas and things like that. Is it booming to the point where everybody can sell one? No, but your odds are better than they used to be. And there's a lot more places to place your work. I think though that you could also look at it. One thing that hasn't changed, there are only a few premium places that are paying good, a fair rate that are, so in other words, there's lots of, I'll pay you a penny a word or 2 pennies a word, that kind of thing. I'll $50 flat for a story. There's tons of places like that, and they have their utility for an up-and-coming writer, because it's hard to get picked for a year's best if you don't have a story published somewhere. It's hard to get a movie deal if you don't have a story published somewhere. Yeah. On the other hand, though, if you're just looking to, have a better chance at that and also make a little bit of money, there's still only a handful of places, that are dominating the landscape.
Yeah. Yeah. John, anything you want to add to that?
Well, of course, Laird's completely wrong. No. No, I think it's true that he and I are in this different kind of position. And so, like a couple of years ago, I did this thing. For some reason, I've been thinking about this lately. I did this library thing in Westport in Connecticut. They had this kind of like literary festival, and it was sort of a horror theme to it. And at one point, they had a single track of programming, and at one point, I got up on the stage with Ellen Datlow was the moderator, which was kind of a trip. And it was myself, and it was Paul and Stephen Graham Jones and Bracken McLeod, maybe Alma Katsu. I feel like there was somebody else there. It might have been Grady Hendrix. Anyway, but so we're up there, and as we're walking up there, look, I looked out over the audience, and out in the audience are people like Rachel Harrison and Eric LaRocca and such, and I had this sudden kind of like moment where I was like, damn, like we're no longer those of us up on the stage, we're no longer the new guys.
Yeah.
We're not the old guys. Obviously King is still still around and such, but we're no longer the new guys. We're just kind of like the guys. And even among us, there's a wide range of paths that we've taken to get to where we are, and it would be difficult looking at any one of us to say, oh well, this is the way to do it. Just do what Paul did, or just do what Laird did, or just do what Grady did. It's. I think you certainly can talk about. Making my own observations. Yeah, there are more small presses with better distribution networks than when Laird and I were starting. There were still some small presses then, Necronomicon Press, say, but they didn't have the same kind of reach that a small press potentially has today. On the other hand, a lot of small, or not a lot, but a certain number of small presses today seem to run into a lot of difficulty when it comes to paying their writers, timely fulfillment of contracts, things like that. There is, don't get me wrong, there is, I would say, a number of small presses, Word Horde and Undertow, just kind of leap to mind, that do good work and do it with integrity, and it's great that we have them. And in the same way, I think Laird is right that there are a lot of outfits, a lot of venues, if you're trying to, sort of get your name out there. But it's also true that the big markets, as it were, are no more than they've ever been. Yes, Tor.com is great, but you have to get a story in Tor.com, So I wouldn't say. I wouldn't say to anybody lose heart, but I would say to anybody you're still going to need to work hard.
Mm-hmm. I see in our comments, Brandon H has mentioned self-publishing. Is that of course that's been a viable route for some time? Is that just your opinion in terms of, like, let's say a new writer, I want to get something published, I want to get something. I'm not looking to make a lot of money. I'm just trying to look to build my name, my reputation as a writer. Is self-publishing helpful, at least in kind of getting your name out there?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I would
you
counsel.
You wouldn't be able to like submit to like the best horror of the year or another like best of anthology doing that.
Look, it's like you could turn around every day and go, look, Paul Tremblay got a huge book deal, or right? Stephen Graham Jones has made it. He's got these bestsellers. One thing that hasn't changed since I came in the field 25 years ago now, a tiny handful of people make all the money. Yeah. That's how it's always been, and I'm pretty sure it's how it's, relatively speaking. What has changed is, if you don't mind getting paid 3 cents a word, there's tons of venues out there, and it's easy to submit to them, and a lot of them are decent. Right. There's a lot. So in other words, a lot more writers, I think, are writing and getting their stuff published semi-pro to pro.
Yeah.
But as far as self-publishing, and I want to tie it in with this, I'm not going to disparage self-publishing. If you want to self-publish, it's great. And I think actually for somebody that's been like I've considered it, but I also have a fan base, so I wouldn't be going into it cold. I could start a little, my own little press, broadsword press, something like that, and cut out the middleman entirely. I've thought about that. However, I don't think it would have been viable for me 25 years ago because, or today, let's say I came in today. Yeah, there are people who make it and they make a ton of money. I think some genres seem like they do better than others. I'm constantly bumping into, you've never heard of these authors. They're self-published on Amazon and they allegedly make tens of thousands of dollars every year, if not every month. So I know that some people can make a go of it, but I don't see too many success stories with horror writers, for example. This is what we're kind of talking about. Yeah. I haven't seen a ton of success in that regard. I've seen some really good stuff up here, but I think not only does it not get noticed, oh, look, 3 reviews on Amazon, they had to do all the outlay themselves. So in other words, it may not be any worse than if they would have gone with a small press that isn't capable of distributing or doesn't have a marketing plan for them. But at least if you're working with a reputable press, they absorbed as a writer, you didn't have to absorb all that, but now you're self-publishing so not only are you not selling any books, you're also, you paid a bunch of money for that luxury.
Yeah.
So I guess if if it was one of those deals where nobody will accept your work, then sure, give it a shot. And I think if you're somebody, there are people, I think, they could make it really work for them because they're savvy in a way. They have a social media presence that they could promote. In other words, someone who is a great show person, I think, or something of that regard. In other words, outside of writing, someone who could really promote themselves well might be able to make a go of it big time. Because I've seen a lot of people backdoor. I won't mention any Jeff Vandermeer names, but I've seen people who basically crash and burn in the middle of their career, reinvent themselves as sort of a social influencer, and then boom, they're back into selling books again. So I think there are people that can utilize other avenues than the writing itself. They're the brand, and then you come into you get addicted to following them on social media or whatever it is, their life story, what have you, and then the writing comes after that. Like, wow, not only are they cool, but they also write novels. I never knew.
Yes.
I think that's for most people, though. I just think you're going to piss away a lot of money, is what I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw the comment from Catherine there about Adam Neville's Ritual Limited, which I agree. As far as I can determine, Adam's made a really good go of it with this. And for those who don't know, Adam Neville is a fantastic writer of horror fiction, of mostly horror novels, although he's written some stories. And Adam wrote a number of novels. I guess the most famous is probably The Ritual, because it was adapted as a pretty good film, actually, which you can find on Netflix. And but after something like 5 or 6 novels with mainstream presses, he became concerned that although he felt his readership was growing, he felt he was growing as a writer, he really felt that his books were getting ignored by his publisher. So he ultimately made the decision to self-publish. However, before he did this, he went to university. He took business courses. Wow. He took courses in the mechanics of publishing. He did a lot of study. So in other words, rather than just saying, that's it, I'm just going to publish everything and sort of throwing it out online, he set up things. He as Laird is saying, he invested a lot of his own money and a lot of his own, time and treasure. Now he's made these lovely books. I don't know, honestly, like how he's doing. Like, he keeps publishing them, so I assume he's doing okay, and I hope he's doing okay. Aside from Adam, the other person I think of obviously is Brandon Sanderson with his thing. But again, I think in both these cases, and it's interesting, right? Because we talk about self-publishing, we tend to think about it. We tend to think about self-publishing, I feel, for people at the beginning of their career. But these guys all did it later on in their career.
Well, that was going to be my point, is that I'm not saying that, because there's going to be somebody out there, or there already is somebody out there in the horror field who's like, I never went through an imprint. I always did it myself. And look at me. Sure. That there's an outlier case, but all the people that I've seen who've been successful, Kelly Link, they started their own publishing company, right?
Yeah.
The bottom line though is everybody, like more, Julia was just saying a second ago about
Willie Meikle,
Meikle. I never know how to pronounce his name, but it's because Adam Neville, business courses, all that good stuff, but he went. This is why I was saying I was considering doing it. Had a fan base.
Yep.
You take your fan. It's easier to start a small business when you are working for a larger business, and you say, "Come with me," and you take half their business with you, and you go, like I say, you're a personal trainer, and you're working for some big corporate. You're working for Gold's Gym. Well, if you're going to go start Barron's,
Barron's bodybuilding.
That's right.
Yeah.
There we go. Triple B.
The BBB.
And take a bunch of their customers with you. That makes it a hell of a lot easier than if you just hung out your shingle.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's what I would.
so it's almost irrelevant that any of these people are making it self-publishing, really, to the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think for someone who was starting out, my advice would be, continue to hone your craft, and keep submitting. I mean, look, when I started publishing, when I got my first successful professional sale, it was because I started at the very, very top of the ladder, which to me was completely counterintuitive. Your impulse when you start writing is I'm just going to sneak in at the bottom and I'm going to work my way up, right? That makes perfect sense, right? But my wife, who had been who got her PhD at Penn State, her professors had told her, when you're submitting an article for publication, you always start at the top and then you work your way down. Make your list of from A to Z and start at A and work your way down to Z. Yeah. Because the chances are, I mean, even if it takes you all the way down to Z, well, that was where you were originally, that was where you thought you were going to start. But let's say you get in at like M. That's still higher than you were thinking of. So always start at the best market you can think of, the best place that you can think of, and be patient and don't be discouraged. I think that's when I think about self-publishing, I guess my own, for new writers, I tend to feel that a lot of it is rooted in impatience, right? In this, I just want this to come out. Why is it taking so long? And it's like, I totally get that. But the people who are reading your stuff also have lives. So, cut them some slack, go and maybe write another story.
Yes.
And in the meantime, let that thing just do its thing. Patience, man, is such a. I feel if there's anything I've learned, as Laird said, after like a couple of decades doing this thing, patience is such a virtue. It's such a necessity if you're not going to lose your mind and do stupid things.
Yes. Great, good commentary. Thank you very much for that perspective. Let's go ahead and move into the beautiful thing that awaits us all. And we've got a number of questions about several of the stories, most of the stories here at least. And I want to start off with just where that title came from. Of course, the phrase appears in the closing story, More Dark, is the title of a fictitious book by the mysterious existential horror author L. What's the story? And I just love that title. It's so cool. What's the story behind that title?
John let me have it. It was a story it was a title that he was working on, something that eventually became Bloom, one of his famous stories. And he decided to not use that title. I said, may I use it? And he said, sure, fine. And so I just thought it was ominous. It was an ominous combination of words that, but at that point I had a reputation for horror. So, a somewhat innocuous title would be counterintuitive. It would lure in some people who didn't know what they were getting into, and it would be a warning to others. And there's really not much more to it than that. I like the sound of it. And of course there's no story, within called that. And it's meant, like you mentioned, it's referenced in More Dark. And the interesting thing about the Beautiful Thing collection is just that even though it came out after the Croning, it marks the end of, or not at the end, but it's a demarcation between my styles of things that I was preoccupied with. I finished pretty much all the stories for The Beautiful Thing about the time that I moved to Montana in 2011, and then came over to New York that winter or late fall. And I immediately I finished the Croning during that stretch, and then I began writing the stories that would come later in the Swift to Chase and Not a Speck of Light. And the style's quite different. My preoccupation, my obsessions have shifted. So it's sort of important to me, especially as I get older, looking back at that, going, yeah, that really was the turning point for me as far as what I was going to be writing in years to come. I didn't abandon Lovecraftian cosmic horror, but I became far more sparing, as the output is, and I don't rule out doing another collection down the road that is a contemporary horror collection that is a cosmic, explicitly Lovecraftian style cosmic horror. But that was the end of that era for me.
Yes. One of the things that I guess I encourage, what I tend to do is not read very broadly. I tend to find authors whose a handful of stories really stick with me, and then I just go deep into their oeuvres, their catalogs, and so watching an author, the just the evolution of this author as a person and what their obsessions are as they change and the styles that they get into, to me, is just so rewarding. And I know, of course, a lot of people, a lot of readers were maybe surprised by the shift in focus of Swift to Chase, and we'll talk about that when we get into that book, which we're queuing up to start on this week in the read along. But I just love seeing the progression that you've made, and now turning really back to your roots with that the I guess grim dark fantasy sword and sorcery type work that we have in your antiquity stories has been such a thrill. And have really enjoyed that a lot.
I appreciate all that. I just want to, before we move on, I just want to say, in all seriousness, I give a lot of credit or blame, I guess, to John, because my life had really changed. My personal life had really changed. It was I was uprooted essentially, and I came all the way over here from the West Coast. And one of the things we talked about, because I spent 3 years, I rented a room from them, and I used to go down to the Fiona, John's wife, had a horse and was kept at a farm, and that actually became a setting for some of my crime novels. And I had a really great experience going down there. 2-3 times a week, we'd go down there and work in the evenings, on the farm, which was really good for me, mentally and physically. But John and I would spend a lot of time those years. I was never been more productive than from 2011 through 2016, just almost to the point where it might have been I burned myself out a little bit. But we would, I just did nothing but write all day. And I was, of course, also reading for the Shirley Jacksons and later on the World Fantasy. And I was just really busy. And every few hours, John and I would go out and walk the dogs or do something, or sit up late and have a scotch. And I would talk to him about, what am I doing with my career? How am I going to progress? Because I'm leaving this, I finished the Croning, in that office at the end of his house. I wrote the last couple thousand words of it there. And I said, okay. Literally, I sent it off, and I said, now what? Like 15 minutes later, I'm sitting there drinking some liquor with him and going, okay, that's done. And so we talked about, that's kind of where Swift to Chase began. And sitting in his kitchen one night, probably 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'd sent off the manuscript Nightshade for the Croning. And I said, all right, what am I going to do? And I remember he said, well, you have an invitation to send a story to John Joseph Adams at his inaugural issue of Nightmare, right? It was right about there. And I said, yeah. And he goes, you said you wanted to write kind of you had wanted to have more to that Men from Porlock. You wanted add another 10,000 words to that, a big chase. It's, why don't you do that? And I said, well, but I'm not writing that kind of story anymore. And he said, no, you could do something that's more personal or almost like metafiction. And we started talking about the Wild Hunt. And that's how Frontier Death Song came about, which is one of the first stories that I wrote that ended up being in Swift to Chase. And that's when it kind of shifted in my mind. Like, okay, this is the direction. They weren't all going to be pulpy like that, but more stream of consciousness, less formal, very informal pacing, very informal writing, dialogue. And that was all, it all began over, sitting in his kitchen, kind of devising a plan.
You've talked in the past about writing, walking the dogs out with John through his neighborhood, and I mentioned, or I remember you mentioning, that's how the Help Me monster kind of came to mind, right? Can you just share that really quickly? I'd love to hear from both of your perspectives, John. I don't know if you remember that actual walk or not. You do?
I do. Yeah.
Sure. Laird, can you just tell us that story real quick?
Yeah. I can't remember. I'd been invited by Ellen to, I think it was, I want to say it. No, it wasn't. It was
Chris Golden.
Chris Golden had invited me to a vampire or, vampirism anthology. And so I was thinking about what I was going to do. And it was very late at night. And we went out and we were walking. I can't remember if that was the night that Athena was acting weird.
Yeah, it was.
She was snarling. And Athena, she was my kind of guardian angel there for a few years. She was a loud dog and she was an alpha. Like, she was very protective, but she was also sweet. And nothing ever scared her. And so her barks were always like, hey, that was her level of barking. This was full on fur. She had very short fur. She looked like a chia pet. She was just like puffed out and snarling. And she had backed into me and wouldn't let me go past her. And I could smell her. I could smell the fear, the anger, adrenaline coming off her. And the only other time I'd ever encountered that is when I was in Montana one night. I woke up at 3 a.m. and she was lying on my chest snarling and her teeth were chattering.
Wow.
And I went outside and there was a black bear they had a fenced, my family had a fenced yard and they were trying to break down the fence. So she knew that was bad news. Any other animal, she didn't care. She chased deer, you name it. So she was going off and scared. And when this 80-pound pit bull is scared, you're taking note. And I looked down, there was like a sodium light, and it was kind of painting the side of a hill. And I saw a person, just for a second, lying there with their arm outstretched and their mouth was open and they were just looking at me in pain. And I kind of blinked and I realized that it was just some branches and it was an old tree stump with a hole in it. And it was a birch. And so it had white bark peeling off. And I said something to the effect of, I got my story right there. It's there. It's like I had the story right there. And we walked for a couple of minutes and I said, okay, we gotta go back inside. And I went back into the office and I know that I wrote like a page of it and got the general idea down. And that's how that was the genesis of it. Because I said, we were talking back and forth and I can't remember which one of us, but like, yeah, and what if they were like, help? And I said, oh yeah, help me. And then of course the idea for the story, what it was going to be about. It doesn't always work that way. A lot of times I'll have an image, but I don't know what the story is. I knew that it was about something that preyed upon rescue workers primarily, or anyone, Good Samaritans.
Yes. John, do you remember anything specifically from that from that walk? You remember?
I mean, that whole time period, we were, Laird and I, to a certain extent, still do that. We'll call each other up every couple of weeks and say, hey, I'm working on this story. And we'll just sort of tell each other the stories that we're working on, and I have a number of writer friends, but I think Laird is probably the only one with whom I exchange ideas like that. We sort of kick things back and forth between us.
Likewise, pretty much the same.
And we, at that particular time, I mean, when it comes to the Help Me monster, we'd both been invited by Chris Golden to be in this vampire anthology, and his only instruction was scary vampires, no Twilight stuff, no romantic vampires, these have to be monsters. And so yeah, he came up with the Help Me monster, which I just thought was this brilliant. What I loved about it was, there's, if you go back to the 19th century, pre-Dracula, even pre-Carmilla, vampires are often these very ephemeral kinds of things that just kind of like attach to you, like a creepy friend, that creepy friend that nobody really likes, and they're just kind of like they just sort of drain all the energy out of you when they, that sort of thing. And so it felt in some ways, there you go.
Yeah, there's our Help Me monster.
Yeah, it felt like it was in some ways a return to that. Although if you read the story, you'll see that it's ultimately quite a bit more aggressive than that. But yeah, we were writing vampire stories at the same time, and so if you read my story, Shadow and Thirst, you'll find that the Help Me monster actually shows up in there just in passing, just very briefly. And
that's right.
And then Laird and I we gave the dogs in the stories have the same name. So there were a couple of places where we were like, we're just gonna sort of like point at each other's work, without hitting you over the head with it, which is something that we've done time and time. The beautiful thing was the title of a poem by a guy named Dennis Doherty, a friend of mine from New Paltz, and he in fact had gotten that title from somebody else, and I love that idea of a title that I love the idea of the title, but it just, I couldn't make it work, and so
was your Orlando, was it Bloom in yours?
In Bloom,
yeah, which makes sense because being Bloom, like you've got Bloom, that's pretty clever.
It was Orlando. Orlando was in but the vampire story was called Shadow and Thirst, and it was
right. I just wanted to know though if your dog, because mine was Tony Orlando.
Right, you had Tony Orlando, and mine was just Orlando.
Okay.
Because I was thinking about Roland, and there's the tower at the bottom of the hill and that sort of stuff, But
classy.
But it was it was this time when one of the things I remember about that time, right, was you're right, it was this kind of culmination of, like, I always think of this 5-book sequence, right, and it's the first three collections, right? So it's Imago sequence, it's Occultation, it's Beautiful Thing, and then it's the short novel The Light is the Darkness, and the longer novel The Croning, and they make this kind of 5-book sort of unit, if you will. It's a loose unit, right? I mean, there's all kinds of other things, and as Greg is saying, or has alluded, the beginning of The Croning also prefigures what's going to come with the Antiquity work as well, currently. But then there was this move, and I can remember us talking during those same walks about slashers, and about how you wanted to go back to the slasher films of the 70s, more the 70s than the 80s, I think. But talking about the 70s, those slasher films, and The Final Girl, and so I honestly believe that Swift to Chase, not that we're talking about that, but just to editorialize for a moment, I honestly think that Swift to Chase was just completely missed by most of the horror fans out there. I think they were just like, this isn't Lovecraft, and they a lot of them didn't know what to make of it. And it's, number one, it's a kind of a novel in stories. Number two, it's a sort of a slasher, and in some ways a meta slasher narrative. And so for those of you who've loved what, say, Stephen has been doing with the Indian Lake trilogy and that, and
now I was a teenage slasher comes out this week, he made a lot out of the slasher genre.
Yeah, I would say go take another look at Swift to Chase, because scattered throughout those stories is this take, Laird's early take on the slasher. I feel like back before I talk about running at the head of the pack, I mean, that's like 10 years ago, and back before the current slasher craze of the last 4 or 5 years struck, that book was already charting out to my mind, some really fascinating directions for the slasher / the concept of the final girl. So, that's just for whatever that's worth.
That's worth a whole lot right now to me, because I'm a huge Stephen Graham Jones fan as well, and he's done very well with the Indian Lake trilogy and kind of bringing a kind of trying to redefine what the final girl is in his Jay Daniels character, and even what the slasher is in I Was a Teenage Slasher. But Jessica Mace is a phenomenal character, and yes, we'll talk plenty about her when we talk about Swift to Chase. But thank you for bringing that up, because that.
Yeah, hopefully it whets people's appetite.
Yeah.
If you haven't read Swift to Chase, or if it's been a long time, go back to it and think about it as a slasher collection, or a collection that not all the stories are slasher stories, but just think about that as a theme that's running through them. Absolutely.
Well, let's and real quick, Wide Carnivorous Sky. Speaking of like the beautiful thing that awaits us all, and how it almost sounds like the videotape from The Ring. It's just like passed on and passed on and passed on. It's come down in various forms. But Wide Carnivorous Sky was a phrase I think used in a Laird story that John, you have as the title of one of your collections. But also, I think Caitlin Kiernan maybe
it's in Caitlin Kiernan's blog. Yep. Okay. And I don't know. There's a phrase from Stevenson or Kipling, I can't remember which. It talks about the wide and starry sky, and I've often wondered if the Wide Carnivorous Sky is a kind of a riff on Caitlin's part on that.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's jump into the stories here and beautiful thing that awaits us all. Starting with Blackwood's Baby, our write up on that was done by Martin Kearns, and he compared it to, I think unsurprisingly, compared it to Blackwood's novella The Wendigo. He said, much like the fate of Defago in Wendigo, Luke Honey has been torn from the realm of intellect and reason into the world of Splithoof, Black Bill. Who may or may not represent a perverse version of the great god Pan. Luke is in service to this godlike entity now, but the question is why. And the Texan, Mr. Williams, in the story mentions that he's kind of surprised Luke Honey is here. They got invited to this extremely exclusive hunting party, but Luke is in some way enthralled in the thrall of Blackwood's Bill. I don't know that we're really clear exactly why or what the hold is there. Anything any light you want to shed on that, Laird?
Not really. No, the write-up was, first of all, the write-ups. I've read all the write-ups, and you guys have spectacular. Well, I just don't want to destroy. Look, we've talked about this in the past. Yep. Occasionally, I will weigh in and say, "Look, this is." I just have to share this. But generally speaking, I don't like to ruin it. I will say this, though. If you look at it as a cursed, like in other words, if you look at the tradition and the legends of curses, that gives you a little more insight into what's going on in this. And whether it's a curse because you've sold your soul, which there's an intimation of that, or because you've done something wrong, or because of original sin, whatever it is, they all kind of work. They overlap in their mechanisms and in their outcomes. Luke Honey is he's cursed. And I don't think it really does I don't think it really does much for to enrich the experience by trying to just basically stat up what the curse did to him.
Yeah, cool. Or the origin of that curse.
I also consider it a weird. Yeah. It's kind of like not the Wendigo, the Willows in a way. You don't want to know, that's a weird story. To me, it actually has more in common with the Willows, just because I consider it a weird story more than a horror. I mean, it's a horror story, obviously, because some bad things happen in it. But I look at it as a weird tale as much as anything else, and I think the less that you try to not dissect, but the less you try to explain the mechanics behind the weirdness, the better off you are.
Yep, understood. Do you think we'll see Luke Honey again? Could you say anything? Tell us that.
We'll see him in Antiquity.
All right. Of course, yes, yeah. We had a little reference on your Patreon about that the other day. I'm excited about that. Actually, we'll come back to Luke Honey. We'll come back to Luke Honey a little bit later. And there is some. I am very. I don't know if you want to comment on this. We'll keep asking questions and comment or don't, as you will.
Sure.
But what the arrangement between the Wellock family, who built the Black Ram Lodge and Blackwood's Baby, there's some. I mean, I assume there's some sort of an arrangement with them, or the Wellocks seem to be a very shadowy family, and having kept the Black Ram Lodge for as long as they have in this place. I don't know, anything there that you'd want to note?
Yeah, that's astute. They're, why, and if I have to go through my own notes again, but they talk about the East Coast Wellocks and the European Wellocks, and there might even be some intimation that they know the Mocks. So, that might imply something pretty nefarious as well.
Yes, yeah, it does. It does. Okay, all right. So, yes, one of these powerful families who are, kind of behind the scenes.
Well, and I do that with the two. We keep jumping over to other things, but I have other families that I do that with as well, but that are also, they're big enough and divided enough that they don't necessarily all share the same agenda. So, in other words, just because some of the Wellocks might be nefarious, it's very possible that others are. I'm just a water tank repairman. I'm a vacuum cleaner salesman. I don't know what the hell, the guys that the rich West Coast Wellocks are up to. I don't want to know.
Yeah. Set of Wellocks in Lubbock, Texas, as well. I think that Mr. Williams got to know. It would be interesting to see how the relationship between those different pockets of the family. Edward, I think you had a couple of questions on the Redfield girls.
I did. Hey guys. So I did the write-up on the Laird Barron subreddit for the Redfield girls. So I read it like 6 times. A thing I wondered was Lord's was the younger of the females, and she's the one who came over from France. After I read it over and over, I thought that the thing in the lake, the ghost or the demon or whatever it was, you don't really say, did that call her from across the pond? Like, she had a psychic vision from France to come rescue, I think, Bernice as the aunt. And so I read it, and I thought, boy, I wonder if the lake brought her over for what happened to her.
It's another theme that runs, I think, or another example of a theme that I have running through that is the idea of cursedness.
Yeah.
And, there's an interesting story behind that. I was commissioned or, invited to submit to Haunted Legends by Ellen Datlow and Nick Mamatas, many, many years ago. And the idea is that you tell true haunted stories. You can do anything you want to with them, but they have to be based on some sort of actual real world legend. And so I happen to live a couple of, 2 or 3 hours, I guess about 3 hours away from Lake Crescent.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I had relatives that lived up in that area on my wife's side. So I had occasion to visit the lake, find out a lot about the lake. And then I did research on it and realized that it had really it's a beautiful place, but it had the sinister reputation. It also had been, at one time, there had been a lot of resorts, lodges, that kind of things, kind of scattered around the rim of the lake. And the Brat Pack had gone there and hung out, and one or more presidents had vacationed there, in their off time, and on and on. It was a really interesting place, but it also had murders. There was the famous Lady of the Lake murder, true story. She's the one that disappeared, and 7 years later, her corpse bobbed up in the lake and had been perfectly preserved as basically a block of soap because of the chemical action of the lake. And they were able to hunt down her husband who had fled and bring him back to justice, from what I understand. And then, of course, the natives, the Klallam, they had legends about the lake being inhabited. We're talking thousands of years old legends that the lake was not to be trifled with. And these are just secondhand, these legends. I didn't want to go into them too much, but that was just, some of the talk is that essentially that there were demons or devils that lived in and around the lake. So I just sort of combined all that. And then there was the part that haunted me was the actual true life genesis for the story, which was a group of women were, I think over here in New Jersey area, something like that. They were driving along a body of water in the middle of the night, and they went in. The driver fell asleep, and they hit the water at like 70 miles an hour. They went off a ramp, boom, landed in the lake or in the open water, and pitch black. They were all on their cell phones calling relatives, and they all died while they were on their cell phones. The relatives got these calls at 2 a.m. The 911 got a call, and it was people trapped inside a car going to the bottom of a body of water. And that to this day, like really, really bothers me. And so I weave that into, it's what I do with a lot of my stories. They're not really any one kind of a story. I do have a tendency to like to weave a bunch of genres to get our traditions together. So this is, the cursed tale. It's a haunting. There's some, occult or even cosmic horror mixed in, and then a true life. Just, the story would have been terrible enough without any of it, with just the fact it was based on an actual tragedy like that.
Was Peter Straub's ghost story an influence on that story?
Not consciously, but Peter Straub and T.E.D. Klein, Dark Gods and Ghost Story and Coco, those three are always an influence on almost everything I do. Like, they're always lurking. Like I said, we've talked about this before.
With Blood Meridian, when I asked you about Blood Meridian 2 of these back.
Yeah, I'm an ecstasy of influence guy. I kind of scoff at the idea that anybody just, out of a vacuum, you just have your own, you're uninfluenced by anyone. You may have your own unique style. Cormac McCarthy is a really good example, but Michael Sisko or somebody, but they're all influenced. The best of us, we embrace those influences. And so, yeah, ghost story, consciously, subconsciously, because that's the thing that happens. I've noticed it now after many, many years of writing. A lot of times you don't even know when you have to see the pattern after you step away from it. I've stepped away from my work and go 5 years later, 10 years later, and go, oh, yeah, I was working through that, or oh wow, that there's some imagery in there that it must have really been influencing. A ghost story was influencing me, or a Stephen King story, or something like that.
Do you feel like, and when I wrote the thing up, I changed my mind part of the way through because it seemed like a ghost story, right? Maybe this is what fans do more than writers, but by the time I reached the end of it, I was like, oh, it is cosmic horror. It just looks like a ghost story. And you kind of alluded, well, there's some cosmic horror. It seemed like what happened to them was this inescapable. Nothing could have prevented it. You don't know what's in the lake, so it's never explained. Do you feel like it's fair to call it a cosmic horror story?
I don't know if I'd go that far, just because I think it might be sort of begging the question. But the bottom line is, if it is a cosmic horror story, it's cosmic weird. In other words, there's not, even though there may be inimical forces, there wasn't like some diabolical plot. Like there's not some, like in Blackwood's Baby, there's a antagonist. There's Black Bill, and there's his baby. And so whether or not they actually had any impact or whether they actually were consciously drawing Luke Honey to his doom is an open question, but that's a good argument. They had something to do, possibly had something to do with inflicting this misery on him. Whatever's going on with the lake is more, genius loci kind of a thing, that basically it just is. It's like there's a insensate force there. And so, yeah, it may be cosmic horror, but only as I'm thinking of it in the sense that of inescapable doom, which a ghost story doesn't necessarily, doesn't have to be about inescapable doom. Matter of fact, a lot of times ghost stories can end happily. The curse is broken. If you can just figure out the way to put the spirits to rest, type of thing. Mm-hmm. But this one doesn't go there.
Yeah. Good questions, Edward. Thank you. Let's move on to Hand of Glory. What drew you to root this story so much in the real life Edward Muybridge? I don't know how I pronounce that last name.
That's how I say it.
Muybridge. Yeah. What was it about that real life film pioneer that made you want to put him in this story? Because there's some details that are pretty bizarre that I think you expand upon. I don't know how much of that you made up and how much is like for real.
Oh, I'd have to go back through and separate it out because there's plenty of, artistic poetic license, but there's a lot of stuff in there that's, truth is stranger than fiction. He had a really remarkable life and was a very eccentric person. And it was the image of the buffalo. I remember I was looking for something and I saw the image of the buffalo, which I'd seen it before, but there was like a moving image. And I started looking into it. And then I realized that was the least unnerving, weird thing that he had all those, essentially old home videos of nude students doing household chores. But they weren't overtly, I mean, who knows whether he was getting his rocks off, but they weren't really sexual. They were, which would have been understandable, right? Creepy in its own, but understandable way. No, these were much just like there was something just dark. They were just doing these like repetitive household tasks. And then there were, filling water. It was like this endless loop of things, which is partly a function of the medium, right? Yeah. He didn't have the ability at the time to make a 20-minute, he wasn't making 20-minute like TikTok type videos or anything. It was like these short repetitive things, like, which of course feeds into my obsession with time and the repetition of time and recurring villains and champions and how nothing really changes, even though it changes completely. Digestion, defecation, boom, the circle, now here come the plants, here come things growing from it. And so that all just fed in.
Very good.
And of course, the more I read about him, the whack, I was still at the height of my kind of at the peak and ending my cosmic horror where these really flamboyant characters are either the protagonist or they're the villain. They're somehow centered in the story. And, the hero or the anti-hero kind of gets enmeshed in either their webs or webs that have shadows that have they've cast throughout their life because of their activities. And he was just really prime.
It is such a noirish piece and a period piece, and the characters are so much fun. It just, to me, it's one of the stories of yours that I think begs most to be adapted to film. Who could you see as Johnny Cope? Who are in Conrad Paxton as well? Who would you and Helios Augustus? Do you have like favorite actors right now who you would cast in those roles?
It's no. I have a hard time. Like some characters, I could see. Johnny Cope would be kind of difficult because, I guess it wouldn't be difficult, but he's a tall, lanky guy, and a lot of guys in Hollywood are like smaller, handsome, and he's not a big, handsome guy. He's like, okay, but he's like a big, angular guy. So I'd have to really think about that.
Thomas Jane with a Bob Hoskins face is kind of the way I think of it.
Yeah, because there's most of my characters I don't really go into heavy description of them, but Isaiah Coleridge, Johnny Cope, their physicality. There are a couple characters that their physicality is pretty important. So you can almost get anybody with the right physical menacing presence to play Cope. I think. I think. In other words, it wouldn't really matter. Ethnicity wouldn't matter as much. It could be a shorter guy as long as they're menacing. You could get like a Tom Hardy type. I could see doing that. But no, a big lantern jawed, character actors. Oh, I tell you who, actually, because it did occur to me at one time. The guy that plays Stabler on the Law and Order spinoff. Detective, what's his name? He played in Happiness. He played a gumshoe that beats people up.
Aaron Eckhart?
Yeah, no. John, do you know what I'm talking about? Special Victims Unit. He's a big, tall. He played in Oz. He was in Oz. Somebody out there knows who I'm talking about. He plays Stabler in Special Victims Unit. I just don't know his name. I'll know it the second my mind is blanking on me. Somebody's typing right now.
Oh, is that Christopher Maloney?
Yes.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, he does have
he's a little older now, but he's the tall, lanky, brutal J.K. Simmons could have done it too. J.K. Simmons would have been fucking. I love that. I love him. Carl Urban. I'd go with Carl Urban any day. You know, he'd have to lose. Well, I don't even care if he loses the. Who cares? The bottom line is those are guys. I would have said that he could have played. That Urban could have played Coleridge. It's just that he's not. You know, he's not visibly ethnic, and I wouldn't.
Yeah.
It'd be whitewashing the character too much. But as far as the attitude, though, and as far as the physicality, you put 20 pounds on him, and he's just, you know, spectacular.
Nice. Someone also suggested Willem Dafoe in his Streets of Fire outfit. Yeah, much younger Willem Dafoe.
He's way too small, I think, but I'd like the attitude. Yeah, he's always a sinister, hard. I mean, he's one of my favorite villains, anti-heroes, whatever.
He's awesome. He's awesome.
Yeah.
The Chicken Dragon 123 did the write up on this, and he made a statement I thought that was really, really. I mean, you can just read Hand of Glory as kind of a period piece, crime drama with supernatural elements, but he also brings in the fact that he notes that I'm quoting here, Paxton and Cope both live in the shadow of a father's legacy. Both men live in their father's homes, carry on their occupations. Paxton apparently has some talent like his father did. In the same way, Cope has his father's gifts. He works for the same mob boss, doing the same work. Paxton is a mirror for Cope, more refined, but also drained of anything to live for. He's less passionate, less empathetic, and less honorable. He is, I suspect, what Cope would be in 10 years' time if the events of the story hadn't pushed him to want to be more than his father's son. When faced with death, Paxton is fine with it. Cope, though, finds that there is more life and more fight in him. I thought that was a really interesting perspective there on those two characters.
I think it's really, it was sort of an unconscious modeling, but yeah, I think there's a lot there. I mean, the thing is John can vouch for this. You know, we put a lot of thought in our writing, but so much of the work is a product of the engine, the subconscious engine. You're doing so much, you know, so much beneath the surface that comes out that you didn't plan, that you didn't consciously plan, but you'll see it. And that's why, you know, over the, I liked writing up those stories over a relatively short, I mean, for me, a relatively short period of time, because it allowed my subconscious to be whatever I was working on, which was upheaval in my life, to manifest itself in all kinds of interesting ways that were sort of thematically cohesive, though.
Yeah.
Where if you write them years and years apart, well, there's another kind of pleasure to be drawn from a collection that the stories are from a lifetime of experience, right? Or over the lifetime. But I think it's really interesting, though, to look at work that was done. No, he wrote this in a heat, like over the course of 2 years. All these, like, albums are that way, right? There's some really interesting albums that we did it all in a 3-week bender, and we did this because we were all going through horrible breakups or whatever it was. Yep. And so here's our Angry Love album.
Yeah.
And so, I think a lot of that stuff wasn't necessarily meticulously planned, but it was a product, though, of just kind of how my brain is structured anyway.
One other point I'll just pull out of there, the distinction between big E evil and little e evil, I thought was really interesting. That the idea that Paxton thinks that Satan is real, but Satan doesn't care about humanity, and he's beyond that by this point. But there's still kind of this little e evil, I guess, it's going on. So even without this kind of devil figure, there's still black magic and occult things going on. But it's almost like this era, heading into the Great Depression, is even the evil is kind of run down and grungy. The evil that they're still dealing with, rather than the big E evil. It's a really interesting thought, and I don't think I've ever seen that kind of distinction anywhere before.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. We only had really one question on the siphon, and I don't know if you want to say something about this. Awesome, but there's an ongoing debate on the siphon thread, and the siphon is one of my favorite of your stories. It is so dark, and the more I read it, the darker it gets. But looking at Lancaster's character, I guess I hadn't, like, the first read through, I totally missed the hints that he is now an inactive serial killer, but he's he still has like a box of kind of these trophies that he's got. Apparently, I mean, it's just strongly hinted that he's been a serial killer. And that he's now inactive, and others on the thread are questioning whether he was a serial killer or is he really now inactive? Is he gonna shift back into it? Is that why he's been chosen by the intelligence operatives to take on this? Anything you want to say about his status as a potential serial killer?
Sure. Actually, this is one of the ones I'll spoil because there's just so much other stuff in the story. I don't find that to be the most interesting thing, or the crucial point. That's one of my favorite stories as far as that I've written. I think it's one of my better stories. It's pretty intricate, and it just has a lot of stuff in it that I enjoy. It's a slow burn. He is a serial killer. There's no other reason for the dark forces to have taken such an interest in him or to have spared him. I mean, they spare other people, but they always spare people that there's some reason that they spare him. In his case, though, him being a predator, is the reason. As far as what's going to happen to him, I'm not going to. I think that doesn't matter what happens to him. But did he, in my mind, had he committed murders? Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Very good. Thank you. I know you had mentioned Nick Cage as a potential actor to play him, to play Lancaster, and that was years ago. He's a little bit older now. Of course, his career is phenomenal. He's really in a second or third wind, I think, with his career right now. But I always thought that was an interesting choice to think about Nick Cage playing Lancaster.
I really admire Nick Cage, actually. I think, and I'm loving that he's kind of. He's still too young to really say this, but he's kind of having, his Cushing, Christopher Lee thing where people are kind of rediscovering him. And, he did some cornball stuff back in the day, and it became kind of popular just to make fun of him. Like, but now all of a sudden he's in Pig. He's in self-referential movies where he pokes fun at himself.
Longleg comes out in another week or so.
From everything I can see about that, it's just like a tour de force.
Yeah,
Mandy, you could not have done a better job with Red as the main character than what he did. He was just phenomenal, and so I really admire the guy. And if they ever said, he's going to be acting in they're going to adapt something and they're going to put him in it, I would be thrilled. He's one of my favorites.
Awesome.
And I think he's here's the thing. I think he's actually a really serious actor when he wants to be. And that's not a requisite. I think do whatever you want to do. I love him no matter what. But there's an extra layer of admiration I have for him. I think he could pull off a serious role easily. Well, he has. He's done it. Yeah. Leaving Las Vegas, right? So, I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, jumping to Jaws of Saturn. The real question that kind of came out of this that people were debating on the thread was there's I guess two things really. One is what is seen in the hole in the wall in Phil Ware's apartment. And Carol sees something. Franco is forced to. Phil Ware puts his head up against the hole in the wall, and I think people are trying to relate this back to maybe the hole in the ziggurat in the Croning that's down in the cave system, or to something along those lines. I'm not convinced of that. I just don't know. Anything you'd want to say about what they see there?
They're seeing H.P. Lovecraft's disembodied head floating in the void, being indescribable.
Nice. That was going to be my guess. Thank you. And then the other question really is like you have this strange coda at the end of the story where you have these two titans, and the discussion is that Franco and Carol having kind of passed into some new incarnation or manifestation, or is it Carol and Phil Ware? Phil seemed to have been grooming her in some sense to be something. No, he also said he was just going to give her back to Franco. He doesn't want to kind of get into a fight over her, so he kind of gives it back. Anything you want to, or is that completely off base?
No, you guys are on the right track. I'm not going to clear it up. because I don't think that will really make the story more interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's also a theme throughout a lot of my stories where there's a Titan figure that devours or becomes, which I think is really interesting because I didn't draw any inspiration from Attack on Titan in that regard, because I don't want to ruin that for people who haven't seen it, but basically there's a weird secret to that. But the point is that, I mean, I think we're all drawing though from the well of human mythology and just our own nightmares. And, you know, ever since I was a kid, I've always been fascinated, just like every other kid, with kaiju and giants. You know, first thing parents ever scared their kids with when I was a kid, besides the Bible, was Jack and the Beanstalk.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna, you know, even those little innocuous things were not innocuous back then. I smell the blood of an Englishman, and I'll grind your bones to make my bread. I mean, there's nothing friendly about this. I was going to treat this home intruder. And so I also, if you've noticed, there's like the transhumanism in some of my stories, and there's the old leech stuff, but it all is, for a lot of practical intents and purposes, it's, you know, interchangeable in the sense of the idea that there's the cyclical nature of existence, and the idea that, you know, evolution, however evolution you want to define it, changes us in ways that make us more or less than what we are as humans. And the idea also of fathers, you know, father figures, authority figures eating their children. It's usually men, but in some of my stories, it's also, you know, it could be women too. But the idea of this authority figure that should be, you know, could protect you with his or her size and strength, he's going to devour you instead, which, you know, speaks a lot to my own personal issues with my dad.
And Edward, I know you'd wanted to bring up the Goya painting.
Yeah, and Laird, you're already kind of speaking to this, but when I read Jaws of Saturn, I also thought about the light is the darkness, because on the videotape in Light is the Darkness, the two kind of rival gods are snacking on children. And I also felt this made an appearance in We Use Swords in the 70s. The Nishi's antagonist kind of did this whole thing.
Yep.
What is the significance of that Goya? Because I Googled that painting when I was reading Jaws of Saturn finally, and I was like, oh, it's this giant monster who's like picking up a human and just taking a bite out of him. Why did that painting leave such an impression?
Well, it's Saturn eating his children, and of course I believe it was Jupiter or Zeus gets smuggled. You know, basically, Mom says, "Oh, here's a rock with a baby swaddling." You know, and he ate the rock, and that's how the gods survived. But the idea of the Titans, you know, or excuse me, of Titanic figures eating eating his young. It had very little to do with Goya per se. Just that image always struck me. The idea of the father figure, you know, consuming, or the mother consuming. And I had a pretty fraught relationship with my parents. And even before it was fraught, there was like, my nightmares would revolve around being killed by my own parents. And then, of course, as I got older, it's like, oh, that was just foreshadowing. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to that.
You know, I was reading an old interview you gave, and you were talking about
Zeus,
either an indifferent cosmos or a carnivorous cosmos. And you said this in some old interview. My sense is that yours has always leaned carnivorous. Like, I could have done a spreadsheet, I didn't, but like a couple in Imago seemed more like an indifferent cosmos. Why do you feel like you've always kind of written the more carnivorous end of that? Because I think
that's how the universe is. I think that the idea of being indifferent, it's a paradox. If you've ever been stranded in the woods, like in a life or death situation, yes, the birds tweet, they're indifferent. The trees are indifferent, but once you stop moving, and I don't mean you're dead, but once you stop moving, those motherfuckers are all going to come down and eat you. So they're holding two thoughts. They're chewing bubblegum and flapping their wings at the same time. Everything out there is going to eat you the minute you stop moving. Go ahead and just, one of these days for experiment, just snap your vertebrae in your neck and be lying helpless in your yard after, a few drinks too many, and just figure out how long it takes for animals in your yard, insects, the grass, if you're there long enough, all is going to consume you. It's going to flies will start landing and they won't fly away. And those little birds that are always happy to eat the suet are going to start pecking on you. But they were absolutely indifferent to you prior to that.
Yeah.
And that's, so I hold these ideas. I feel like this is really the secret of it, that you have both. And it's not that there's a plot. I always talked about Alaska as not really wanting humans to be, in its space, and that it would be that it's always trying to eject you. That there wasn't some kind of presence that was thinking dark thoughts towards you. It was more like when you get a splinter in your arm, eventually your body pushes it out. When you get back, when you get the flu, or something wrong with you, your body your system creates antibodies. White blood cells come out to defend you, and they kill whatever they can. I feel like that satisfies the indifferent. Yeah, they're having this horrible reaction to you, but in general, it's indifference. It's just it's doing what it does. Animals have thoughts, but they're not plotting against you. They just, when you fuck up enough, they'll come eat you. And then you have a few actors within that overall tapestry mechanism that are plotting you. Old Shere Khan, he's like, yeah, Mowgli, But I think that that's like a manifestation of consciousness. I've always said that consciousness is just, maybe to paraphrase Sagan or somebody, is basically the universe's way of experiencing itself. So overall, there's this sort of indifferent absorption sort of thing going on, but there are sensors, there are apparati that have a little more intentionality. So you can kind of say both are true.
One of my favorite things that you've written is there was a paragraph in Blood Standard, and you describe Alaska, and I pulled it up while we were talking, but you said it's palpably malevolent in its indifference.
Right.
It's one of my favorite things that you've written is that specific paragraph.
It's right, and that's utterly contradictory.
Yeah.
But here's the problem: that things aren't necessarily contradictory. There's the parallax effect. The moon seems to move as you're driving your car. It seems to shift position. Things in the horizon seem like they're moving when they're not moving. Maybe you're moving. And so, right, the idea that it's palpably malevolence, seems to be predicated by intention. Mm-hmm. But I don't necessarily think that that's true. But even if it is true, just because an actor within the larger scope of the universe wishes you ill doesn't mean the universe writ large gives a flying rat's ass. So Cthulhu, like, in other words, even looking at Lovecraft's, the universe might be indifferent, but Cthulhu's not. Cthulhu's quite interested in what we're up to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where's his next tasty snack?
The stars don't care.
Yeah. But Old Leech and his children do care. In fact, they love us. They love us very much.
Yep.
But one of our guests here, one of our viewers, New Groove Vinyl Club, mentioned John Langan used similar Saturn Goya giant consuming imagery.
Yeah, I'm calling my lawyers, by the way.
So I believe that's the what the cover art is representing there is in Paris in the Mouth of Kronos.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, no, it's true. I can remember when Laird was talking about the story that he was writing. I think at that point you were calling it Gula de Saturnus.
Is that when you were writing notes? That's
it's, and I just, but the image of the Titan inside the hotel, like I love that idea, But the funny thing is that I just kind of I just sort of filed that away, and when I wrote that story, at some point after the story was done, I think it might have been when I was writing the story notes, I was like, holy cow, that's Laird's story. Like that was my response to Laird's story. And the picture that I drew of the Saturn figure or Kronos, is much more in line with, say, Goya's painting, right? Like that sort of monstrous, crazy old man. Yeah, it's another place where quite unintentionally in that case, where Laird's work and my work intersect one another.
Yeah. And how amazing that is for us as readers to get that to kind of benefit from that ecstasy of influence, or that conversation that you guys are having, even even if it's unintentional. That's it's really cool that we get to benefit from that. Let me see. Jumping onto Vastation, just one quick question on this: Is it? This is my question here. Is the narrator of Vastation in one of the rooms of hell from Procession of Black Sloth?
No.
Okay, thank you.
But someone once said, is the 49.5-foot woman straps it on, which has now been retitled, but because there's a hell dimension to that. Is that related to Procession of the Black Sloth? And I have to say that's a pretty sharp guess.
Yeah, I think Eves maybe said that, made that catch. I remember that conversation online.
Vastation exists in the same universe potentially. It's just, but no, he's not sitting in one of the 18 hells now.
It's interesting how it ends. I mean, there's a lot of commentary on that. The write up on it is pretty phenomenal, bringing up the UMS unutterably mad superhuman who's experiencing this. But the fact that it's at the end of it, there's the guy sitting there with his wife having coffee and over breakfast in the kitchen, and it's almost like this, just kind of a maybe Walter Mitty sort of like, has he simply just imagined all of this stuff? Is, I guess, one way it could be read. But it really is one of your stories that got to me that I just found so horribly disturbing. It's just apocalypse upon apocalypse.
Yep. And it was my response. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say it was just my response 10 years on from Shiva.
Yeah.
It's not related to Shiva directly, but it was. I said to myself, what would I do if I were writing Shiva today? And so that was what happened. In
the Shiva as a starting point was one of the points that was made in the discussion. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting.
Also, to fill in more background information, we wrote stories for an anthology of the Daryl Schweitzer was editing, called Cthulhu's Reign, and Daryl at that point was of the opinion that the only kind of new Cthulhu anthology to be done was like, what happens when Cthulhu wins? What happens when the old ones come back? And I remember talking about this with Laird. It's entirely possible I remember him chuckling merrily at the thought of the future he was going to inflict on poor, hapless Daryl Schweitzer, who was no doubt not expecting Vastation, but was expecting something a little bit, Cthulhu comes back. Vastation tries to really like bend your mind with language in a way that I think like Lovecraft would have enjoyed, but is not Lovecraftian, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's an exercise. Like, I have several stories like that. Yeah, I just brought up Nemesis from Not a Speck of Light. Yeah, they're actually, they're stories, absolutely, but it's much me between numbers doing that, going, okay. So we have our little intermission. We have like an instrumental. That's kind of how I look at it. I look at my collections like albums as much as anything. And here's your instrumental. And then it segues into and then I move on into the next part.
That makes a lot of sense. And John, the story you wrote, that's the one that has the fruit at the end of it, right?
Yeah, the screaming fruit, the screaming apple. Yeah.
Good grief, what a horrific image. I remember that one well.
Thank you.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a really amazing and horrific story. Okay, good. Laird, thank you for sharing that. It is just such Vastation is such a different piece, and it has really haunted me. Okay. The Men from Porlock, and hey, folks, we've got a couple more stories here in The Beautiful Thing That Awaits Us All. If you have questions, again, please put them in the chat. I've talked with you about The Men from Porlock on previous interviews, and I don't want to just overdo that story, but I will say one thing that that was just brought up on the threads that I really liked about Men from Porlock is Poco Nick says the children of Old Leech are ultimately a covert colonizing force that also engages in recreational activities with human lives. And I think he kind of nailed it there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Any response to that?
No, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're not necessarily monolithic, which is John and I have talked about that. I don't really want to, stat them up, but or dissect them too much. But I do think the idea that they have multiple agendas, they're so far advanced compared to us that it's not always life or death for them. The stakes aren't life or death messing with us any more than we're messing with, ants or something.
Yes.
And some people love their ant colonies, man.
Well, yeah, true. Imagine the way the world is now, right? Imagine, the U.S., China, Russia, Japan, India all have space programs. Yeah. So, we like to imagine, in the future it'll be the Federation and we'll all be under one government and blah, blah, blah. But will we? Right. And so in the future, you can imagine the representatives of many different nations appearing in the skies over a particular world and saying, "Hey, come join us! No, come join us!" So things could get very granular, and so I think there's no reason to think that the children of Old Leech or anyone else might not be similar.
Yes, and of course there are plenty of other powers at play here, like
sure.
Bill Wary and his, what is his relationship to the old Leachian tribes, and you've got this beetle insect whole world underneath the ground from the forest. They're vying for the future, etc. There are a lot of powers kind of at play in the overall universe, and I don't want to push those elements too far. I just love how they appear in the Great Eminence is in there as well, Edward.
Yep.
And I just want to enjoy each story as it comes, but it is fun to see the various powers that be out there.
Good old Tom Mandibole.
Yes, Mandibole as well.
Yep.
And well, speaking of that, I understand from a conversation we had once before that it was in fact John Langan who helped with kind of naming or giving you the pronunciation of that puppet character. You guys were in a conversation, I think, about that. Do you recall that?
I don't remember. We were riding on the train to KGB. I'd flown over from Washington State, so this is back in 2010, early 2011, I guess, and so winter of 2010. And we were just chatting, and I said I should write a story about this. And so we started talking, and I said, basically kind of sketched out the idea on the train. And I said, I got to come up with a name though for the sinister puppet. It's Tom, because I'd like to go back to names. There's a lot of Toms in my stories, good and bad.
Yeah.
And he said, you need something kind of Italian, something to do with the mouth. He goes, mandible. I said, mandible. And he's like, or mandibole, like mandibole. And I went, or mandibole. And I said, like, or mandibole. And that was it. I latched onto that.
Nice. I love that.
But the story was half written. I was just sitting there thinking about it while we were writing on the train. Obviously I had a lot of work to do with it, but that was one of those stories I wrote really quickly too. It's a pretty long story, but I wrote it in a couple of weeks, which normally takes me a couple months to write any length of a story. That one, when I finally sat down and wrote it a few months later, it was just boom, done.
Wow. That's amazing. I think that was the first story that I can recall that I read of yours, and was just thinking that, wow, it really, it's, now I look at it and think it is so satirical, and it's fully satirical, and it is fully horror at the same time. And I of course, there's so many. Is it this Roman Aklef? Am I pronouncing that right? Roman Aklef?
Romana Clef,
Romana Clef, thank you. Story with real names, real people's names being changed a little bit. Very little in this case. I do wonder, and I couldn't find any reference to this. I looked around quite a bit for this, but the W. Lindblad, the puppet maker and sycophant for L, is that based on a real person?
Well, hold on, we talking about lawyer.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take that as a maybe.
Okay. Thank you. That's interesting because the Lindblad's quite a significant figure in this, and in fact, there's a little bit of a Black Guide reference in there, I think, based on Lindblad. But yeah, that was a really interesting.
Everybody in there is, obviously nobody's real, but everybody has their, there's a reflection of. I'm trying to think if there's any characters in there except for, no, all of them. There's some real life analog probably.
Wow. That's really cool. John, I wonder if you remember, of course, this story has been within the horror community, somewhat controversial. People thinking, oh, Laird's taken a nasty swipe at Thomas Ligotti or whatever. And I love the fact, and I read back through the Thomas Ligotti online message board about the conversation that you, Laird, had with John Padgett. John Padgett is like the big advocate for Tom Ligotti and has done incredible work to bring Ligotti's work into, to help proliferate it. And is, I think, a real champion for Ligotti's work. He's the kind of person that I think is, as an artist advocate, like we all ought to be looking at John Padgett saying, like, man, he's doing incredible work.
Sure.
But you guys had a great conversation about it, and really I think he came away understanding just how much of a work of satire this was. All that to say, there's some controversy about that. And John, I just wondered kind of what your response was when you first saw it, or if you remember how people were reacting to it, kind of within the writing circles when it first came out.
I think not enough people paid attention to the poor John Langan character and the horrible, horrible things that are done to him. I mean, look at the Ligotti character, right? He appears as this sort of, he's in like a sort of a black cloak. He's like the ghost of Christmas future and blah, blah, blah. And he's got all this portentous stuff. And poor John with his lovely puppets, right? What happens to them?
That he stole from his daughter.
Yeah. I mean, all right, let's even that. Look at that. I mean,
he's a jerk.
Yeah, boy.
But it's a horror story. Jerks get what they have coming.
Yeah, wow, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
right. I moralized a little bit.
Yeah, there's some more.
I used you as a lesson. I mean, your likeness.
Oh my God. But no, I mean, I think that, like, on the one hand, there are, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. There are absolutely people who think of Tom Ligotti as a guru. Yeah, sure. And they read The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, and they're like, yeah, man. And on the one hand, the fact that Ligotti wrote it and allowed it to be published suggests that, he's putting these ideas out there. Maybe he believes this stuff. On the other hand, people who know him say, no, he's really very sweet, and he doesn't want anyone to do anything to themselves and all this kind of stuff. At the same time, be that as it may, John Padgett, he still put this stuff out there into the world, right? With no kind of disclaimer that said, hey, this is just a 5-finger exercise. So I think, there's, and I really respect Ligotti's work. I really like Ligotti's work. So I don't want to take pot shots at the guy, right? Yeah. He's done what he's done, with his own kind of integrity as an artist. But I do feel a little bit like, you're kind of trying to have it both ways when you put this stuff out there that says existence is pain and terrible, and the very best thing we could do is just walk ourselves into oblivion and extinction. And then you're like, but don't, a friend of, do you know what I mean? And then you're like, but I was only kidding?
Yeah.
So I think that the discomfort that people feel at that portrayal, at that satirization of this guy as one aspect or one element of Ligotti's philosophy or whatever you want to call it. I think I'm trying to think of the right way to put this. I think maybe they should also be asking themselves, maybe questions about what is the source of that satire? Where is that coming from? I mean, it's possible, right? You can make fun of anyone. And it can just be like mean-spirited trolling, as the kids say. But I don't think that's necessarily the case here. I think that there is, through a very sharp satirical, can you talk about a sharp satirical lens? That doesn't really work as a trope. But anyway, you know what I'm saying? With a sharp satirical knife, there's an attempt to sort of peel back some of that, kind of nihilism or whatever you want to call it, that lies at the center of Ligotti's philosophy, if not always his fiction.
Yeah.
It's not a swipe at Ligotti that really, I mean, any more than it is anybody else. It was.
It's a real swipe at John Langan. That's what it's a swipe at.
No, but I talked to John, Padgett about this, and I talked to you guys about it in the past. And look, it is what it is. It made people mad. I am glad, because you want a reaction. If it pissed you off, good. I've said that in the past. If you thought that I was being mean to you, I probably was, because that's the only way you could take it, John. But it really isn't aimed at Ligotti as much as the culture, which is what, when I explained that to John Padgett, he'd already come to that conclusion. So the fans can be pretty mad, the diehard fans, because I wasn't saying anything too kind about the adulation of that. I mean, think about it. There are a lot of people who like Ligotti, his philosophy about nihilism, yet they've got kids running around. I'm like, well,
yeah.
How do you square?
How do you square it?
Well, how do you square embracing the fierce intellect of and the embracing antinatalism?
Yeah.
It's not a question of is he a genius. I'm not talking about Ligotti, and that's why I as a person or a writer, that was kind of the point of the story, though it had nothing to do with him. Matter of fact, the conclusion, spoiler, is that the Ligotti character is absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So, no, it's the lampooning is really our devotion to the cult of personality. Any of us, who, that people start deifying Raiders. Let's not deify Raiders.
Yeah.
Let's not do that.
Ain't that the truth?
And no one is satirized more than Mr. B in the story. I feel.
Let's have another conversation about that, Greg. Who's more satirized?
No. John L. is definitely satirized.
He takes it. He gets it right between the eyes.
He's drank the Kool-Aid by the end of the story for sure. Speaking of John L., I do want to just mention, as we're wrapping up on the beautiful thing that awaits us all. If folks haven't seen this, I think New Groove Vinyl Club mentioned it in the chat. But the Children of Old Leech, I think it was Ross Lockhart, and Justin Steele who put this cool project together. But there's some great writers in this. John, you've got your story in here.
I thought you were going to say there's some great writers, and John, you're in there too,
including John at the forefront of which is John Langan, and you have your trying to find it here on the list. Is it Emer?
I pronounce it Ymir, but
Ymir.
That's probably wrong.
Okay,
it's probably
Ymir.
something like Ymir or something like that, or some weird Icelandic thing. Yeah,
but you take you kind of freestanding couple of characters. Well, one of them who was just very briefly mentioned, Barrett Langan, who's mentioned in Hallucigenia, and you bring him into this along with a new character, but they have a little bit of a misadventure with the Schote family there, and you actually kind of take it. The Tyler and is it Josh Schote, I think, or Justin and Josh, I think. Can you tell us about like why you decided to take on this story and what the Ymir character or what that figure is? How do you use the Ymir figure in this?
So Laird had when he sent me a copy I think I might have subscribed to it. I think I was subscribing to the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction at that point. So I think I got the issue, but then Laird also sent me a copy of it that had hallucigenia in it. And I loved that story. But I was also like, oh, there's Barry Langan, huh? Yeah. And I said to Laird, oh, I'm going to write a story about Barrett Langan. And I remember at one point we were sort of on the probably on the phone, I guess, like just kicking around. Well, who is he and what does he do and where does his money come from? Yep, that's the one.
That's the issue right there.
I mean, like in this, like the talk about, that's a novella, man. That's just a little novel, and so I never got around to writing that story until the anthology call came, and I thought, well, here you go. Here is my chance to write this story. At the same time, Laird and I had been, we've for years now, decades at this point, we've been kicking around the idea of writing of collaborating. And our very first collaboration, I was like, what should we do? And Laird was like, Godzilla versus Cthulhu, like completely straight faced. So we were going to do that, but then it doesn't really seem like maybe that would work. And then I had this idea for a woman who'd gotten back from being a trucker in Iraq. And so we kind of talked through some of that and blah, blah, blah. But again, that didn't really come to anything. But then all of that kind of came together in the form of the story. And was like, oh, okay, so I can have my point of view character can be this character from the story that Laird and I were going to write. And yes, I'll have old Barry Langan in there as well. And Ymir in Norse mythology, Odin and his brothers. No, actually, that's not true. Odin's parents, I think it is. No, is it Odin and his brothers? Maybe it is Odin and his brothers. Anyway, somebody kills Ymir, and they make everything out of his body. And so we're living within, like, the clouds are his brains, and we're living within his skull. So I like that idea. So often I feel in and the giants, I should just add, in Norse mythology are carnivorous, or they like people. They're very interested in people because we're delicious. So all of that seemed like a really cool way to make reference to stuff that Laird was doing in his work. He keeps insisting it's not canon, but I'm pretty sure it is.
Edward, I think you were going to ask a question. Just thinking about the Children of Old Leech and the writers, who many of your contemporaries here. But Edward, you had a kind of a related question.
I did. And this question is actually for John and not Laird. But John, I recently read something called The Inconsolables by Michael Wehunt. And
yes,
you wrote the foreword for that.
I did.
And so in the foreword, you said that Michael Wehunt, his prose owed a debt to Robert Aikman, Flannery O'Connor, and Laird Barron.
Yes, absolutely.
I tried to harass Laird on this on Patreon, and he smartly evaded the question. But who do you think are young writers that Laird has been the primary influence for? Like maybe Wehunt. I've heard Christopher Slatsky has been heavily influenced by Laird, but like who are these writers that you think Laird is kind of the guiding light for?
I think if you look at that Children of Old Leech, if you look at people like Mike Griffin, Scott Nicolay, they were heavily influenced by Laird. I think Gemma Files, Gemma's her own creature.
Nick Pizzolatto.
But we'll get to him in a second.
No, that's okay.
But I think that Gemma responded to Laird's stuff very, very powerfully. I think she's her own, as I said, absolutely her own writer. But I think she really responded to his stuff.
She evolves as much or more than any writer I've seen over her career.
Yeah. And I think that, so I think some of those would be some of the writers, just kind of off the top of my head, that group that I think Joe Pulver the late great Joe Pulver, I think, was responding to Laird's stuff as he went on. And yeah, among those much younger writers than we are, I suppose. Wehunt's very much stamped with it seems to me, with Laird's prose and with the particular way that Laird kind of manipulates point of view and such. I think Weehan's absolutely indebted to that. I'm sure there's others, but at the moment, none of them are in my brain.
Awesome, thank you. Shifting over now to the Croning, had a number of questions that came out of our various discussions, and it's been a blast to try to kind of do some fan theory work on all of the all of the threads that are going on and the layers of the story there. Of course, certain things really came out, just the Old Leech mythos, the Black Guide specifically. And the relationship between Don and Michelle is just very interesting. But let's start with, since Old Leech is such a kind of in some ways this at the center of the Croning, and it was I guess developed or part of that Leech image came from a conversation that or is in some way owed to John, I understand.
As is so often the case, ladies and gentlemen, as is so often the case.
And I think you may have just shared this on Julia Morgan's YouTube channel a couple of days ago, but would you mind just briefly recapping that story, Laird?
Right. I read John's on School Island, which was in the magazine Fantasy and Science Fiction, and that was his first story, published or pro story. And there was the archaeologist character was deciphering runes, and one of them was like a worm like symbol, and we were talking about that, and I just said, "Are you going to use that again?" And no, and I said, "Do you mind if I put that in a story?" And he's like, "Fine." And then I started thinking about, I don't want it to be a worm, though. I want it to be, because it wasn't really clear what it was. It was just,
it's like a broken circle.
Yeah. And I just said, what's more intimidating than a worm? So,
and the leech is definitely.
I thought a leech. You can have the old snake next. Never mind. But yeah, I had a bad experience with leeches anyway when I was a kid, like a toddler. So
like Stand By Me, kind of walk through the water and come out with leeches kind of thing.
Yep.
Wow.
I was cold water leeches, I think. Just terrible. And I remember I was just 4 or 5 years old. My mom was letting me splash around in the edge of a lake, and it was gravel. So it wasn't even sand, it was gravel. And I came out and my mom screamed and then grabbed me, and I had leeches everywhere. And I mean, she's prying them off all parts of my body.
Oh my
God. Yeah, that was, that sticks in your mind. So I just thought that when worms had maggots and worms are pretty obvious, they've been done. So I just, Lovecraft or Derleth or whomever, Clark Ashton Smith had doles. So I just said, no, I want something that's has a real world analog that's really intimidating compared to a worm. And I settled on they're parasites on top of everything else. So that's how that happened.
I love it. There's this image that you have in the Croning of kind of the line of, in particular, the line of children heading toward the cave to be consumed by the Great Dark, the Dark Ones, Old Leech, etc. But of course, that image takes me straight back to your, one of your earliest stories, which is Old Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
That's described as Mother in there rather than Old Leech, and I'm assuming it's just kind of a prefiguring. Just there's something about that image of people being marched into a cave to go down into the cavern to feed something that just has maybe stuck in your subconscious or haunted you, rather than, well, Mother is really just another form of Old Leech. But there is something about like the idea even of all caves lead to this place.
Yeah, old I mean, including caves that are on other planets, moons. Old Leech in my mind is distinct from whatever the father mother figure of Old Virginia. I think that'd be much closer to talking about the gray eminence, that they may be one and the same. But yeah, Old Leech is not. And there is some, it's fair to say that I hadn't worked out. I mean, I hadn't even had an idea for Old Leech back when I wrote that. Yeah. I actually was pretty coherent in my overall strategy for being a horror writer. but that doesn't mean that I had pre-planned. Like, in other words, I didn't have a blueprint for everything I was going to do. I wouldn't have enjoyed writing if I was going to do that. And so things became manifest, and I try to avoid retconning though. So in some ways, I'm kind of like, no, I think old, whatever's in the mountains there, and possibly off the eastern seaboard, is something distinct from Old Leech. Whether or not they are aware of each other, who knows? There's predators exist in the same pond,
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I just think that that image is so stark and haunting. That to me is fascinating. Moving to the Black Guide, of course, this is one of the cross catalog tokens that helps tie together so many of your stories. It appears in it's pretty central to the Mysterium Tremendum and the Croning. I think possibly in Occultation, there's this weird book in the room there that might be that. And then more dark, there's a very small reference to the W. Lindblad character being basically barred from entering the UK because they tried to purchase a rare book, and it's the description is it was the foreign edition of a U.S. weird almanac or an occult guidebook. So I think it's probably a sly reference there to more dark, and it appears in Paul Tremblay's notes for The Barn in the Wild from Children of Old Leech. Also in his book Growing Things, it appeared in that collection as well. There are probably other stories I'm not aware of that the Black Guide. I mean, it's sort of this kind of shared element. I don't know, John or Laird, either of you want to just kind of share how this came about? It sounds like it was something you and John, Laird, and Paul Tremblay were sitting around.
Yeah, it was.
About.
So in the summer of 2002. My wife and I took a trip to the south of France, to Provence, as part of an academic conference, and then we toured around that part of the country. And one of our friends had told us to get a Michelin guide, what's called the Green Book, and which is, for anybody who wonders, at least it was at the time, just indispensable to as just. I guess by today's standards, you don't have Wi-Fi, it doesn't matter. You've got that book, right? Le Guide Vert. And then a friend of ours, while we were there, told us there's something called Le Guide Noir, the black guide. Huh. And it's this guide to all the kind of weird stuff in Provence, including there's like a monster that was supposed to be in one of the rivers there, the Rhone or something like that, this sort of crazy, fantastical beast. So it was more of like a sort of tour guide, if you will, but just, for the goth tour guide. But I love that idea. And Laird and I talked about it just incessantly, the idea of having something that was, and I think Laird made in some ways better use of it initially than I did, because Laird's version of the Black Guide, right, is just like stuffed with all these different things. So like no two copies of the Black Guide are necessarily the same, because different people have had them and different people have added things into them, have scribbled notes in them. So that there might be, the five of us might all have our editions of the Black Guide, and they might be five very, very different books. So yeah, that became this tremendously, for both of us, I think. And yeah, Paul used it in his story. It became this very, very useful kind of, where is your source for this occult information? Oh, the Black Guide. I think Laird gave it the Latin name, the what is it, Mortimer Calignus, something like that.
And
so that and then that's also, if you look at the cover design for the hard cover of the Children of Old Leech, that's kind of the model for it, is the black. You're holding a copy of the Black Guide.
Yeah.
Don't
it has like post-it. Look at the back. It looks like post-it notes.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. When I saw the design, when I realized, oh, hey, it actually looks like the Black Guide, I had to have it.
Yeah, I think I have an online version in one or two of my stories.
Yeah, I thought that there was a
blackguide.com, but it always crashes your computer.
Yeah. Do you happen to recall off the top of your head the stories that it appears in?
I think it actually appears maybe in Saphira, actually, in the title story to that collection you were holding up, and I think maybe in a collection in a story called Mother of Stone. I'm not sure where else.
Yeah, I want to make an appendix with listing, or probably a post on Reddit, kind of listing all the stories that appeared, and it also I think it was it you or Paul Tremblay who had a group of students write entries from the Black Guide, like 8-year-olds.
I think that was Paul, wasn't it? Yeah. He had a bunch of creative writing students write Black Guide entries, and then he put it together and was trying to pass it off on eBay. People don't buy that. Don't.
That's so cool. Let me see. Cool. Laird, anything else about the Black Guide that will we see any more stories?
It's in antiquity.
Is it really?
Oh, it's one of the major tomes.
Okay. I probably missed that, but Okay. Awesome. Good. Let me see. Jumping to, we're going a little bit long, so let me try to wrap this up with just a few more questions on the Croning. There are so many monsters in the monsters, creatures, villains listed in the Croning. Servitors, limbless ones, the worm things in the trees, the witch thing, cultists, of course, Mr. R, aka Rumpelstiltskin, the children of Old Leech, the dark ones, and then Old Leech himself. I don't think I may have missed some, but I guess. Are the servitors? Is that a reference to the humans who are in service to the children of Old Leech, or were the servitors the limbless ones? I guess that's the main thing that kind of got hung up on or got confused by.
I don't think I get hung up on the nomenclature, because I think a lot of it is interchangeable, or not necessarily it's interchangeable, but just how humans process information. And also the nebulous nature of the children of Old Leech. What, they can take or inhabit the skins of things much larger than themselves, much smaller. Actually, who's to say even how large or small they really are? Servitor. There is one, area that might be worth looking at as far as delineating it or explicating it, and that would be humans that are no longer human at all, that are basically, they may have a tiny vestige of their humanity left, and there's people like Michelle who are somewhere in the middle. If you look at the broadsword, old Pershing, he's somewhere in the middle. He's not 100% one of them, because he still thinks he still has his own memories, which are probably going to vanish. And then there's also the idea that there's probably cultists who don't have any. That they're just humans who are worshiping them. So servitors, though, in my mind, were generally the idea, the people were throwing that around. You had something going on with you. You were, more than just a regular person in some regard. But you weren't necessarily a limbless ones are completely, they might be children. I've never delineated them. Are they children of Old Leech? Are they some intermediate form? Because that's the thing that I love about the transhumanism and about Old Leech and its servitor or its children, is that there are all these different nebulous incarnations or instars of them. Actually, an analog would be like the Shoggoths for Lovecraft. They can take all these different forms. I mean, they're different. These things have different motivations and whatnot, but. And they're servants, but not necessarily like a servant race. Maybe they're more like worshippers, but with a real purpose. But they definitely, you meet one that takes one form, and then you meet another that seems to be completely unrelated. They might be the exact same one in a different form, for all you know.
Very good, thank you. That does clear things up. Edward, you wanted to ask. Jump in with a question?
I did, and it's kind of along this topic. So in the second chapter, you have these corrupt federales, and they're going to sacrifice the main character in the Cave of the Ancients, right? Something intervenes. When I read through it the second to the third time, I wondered if that was actually Old Leech. And then I've discussed it with Greg, discussed it with people online. Was that Bronson Ford? Was it Old Leech? Was it something else? Who pulled their strings and they all kind of flew away into the darkness?
Oh, sorry, I was trying to read something somebody was asking on.
No, that's okay.
So you're talking about when they were in Mexico.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. That's left intentionally. In other words, it doesn't matter. I will say this, though. Old Leech very seldom acts directly. It can't. And if it does, it wipes everything out, probably. So whatever did it might have been the power of Old Leech compels you. And so as to who it was, that's probably an open question. I like the idea that it was Michelle or Bronson. Probably not Michelle, but probably something with real power.
Yeah.
Julie is asking a good question here about Dawn and Michelle. Would it have made any difference if Dawn had paid attention to the movies his wife has up in the attic, the old 8mm films or whatever? If he paid a little bit more attention to that, and it brings up a good question. There are a number of times when I think, oh my goodness, if I were Dawn, I would have said, well, hold on, stop. Just a couple of places where I would have said, stop the bus, I'm getting off. This is really bizarre and dangerous. And of course, we know his memory has been affected. And we find out by the end of the book, we find out why. It's his exposure to the children of Old Leech. It starts messing up your brain. But there's just like, even kind of in the moment, I think, when he's talking with Smelzer in Slango Camp in 1980, and Smelzer brings up the fact that there's a reference to a B. Kalimov in the whatever it was, the 1840s, who explored this area, and he knows there's a Boris Kalimov that his wife knows, and that's just he kind of writes it off as a coincidence. To me, that's a crazy coincidence. But it seems like, I mean, the way I read it is Dawn's been conditioned to dismiss weird things for a couple of decades now because of his proximity to Michelle, the weird things that she has going on in her orbit. And so it's something like her subtle influence, as well as his own flagging mental acuity, that have impaired his judgment at some places where, man, you'd think he'd be kind of concerned about that. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Well, there's a couple of things going on. One, we don't even know what Michelle's been doing to him, because it's pretty obvious that she hasn't been human for a long time, not fully human. So she could be leeching, his free will, not his free will, but basically, causing mad cow disease in his brain. But here's the thing, though, just setting aside all of the plot contrivances and things like that, explanations, I really get sick and tired, and I have been since I was a kid, of every time something scary happens in a story, everybody blows their fucking stack and overreacts. Oh, I'm running from this place. What the hell are you going to do? You're going to move out. If you right now, if you have a lot of money, you can do whatever you want. But okay, so we're living in this place we're living in. It took everything we have to get moved here. I don't give a flying rat's ass if shit starts flying off the shelves and there's a cat downstairs going, Laird! What the fuck am I going to do? What am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
Nothing. I'm going to go damn and lock my door at night.
Yeah.
That's going on the Patreon.
Realistically, though, what do people do with supernatural events? A few of them go on the History Channel and go, I'm not saying it's ghosts, but it's aliens or ghosts. It could be alien ghosts.
Yeah.
Everybody else just goes, I didn't hear it. I didn't see it. Or they'll sit around and drink their Tom and Jerry's for a couple nights with shaking hands, and then go, I haven't heard anything for a couple nights. I guess it's okay. And they move on with their freaking lives.
Yeah.
Every freaking Blumhouse movie, everybody starts to rending their garments and pulling their hair out. I'm like, I ain't got time for that in this economy. So the bottom line is, though, the human brain is really interesting. I've had so many weird experiences, and what did I ever do with any of them?
Yeah.
I would occasionally, come Halloween, Patreon, I'm going to go ahead and lay out one a day. Here's some crazy shit that happened. We only moved out of one place in my entire life because it was creepy, and that was because we actually had an opportunity to move anyway. And so my feeling is, so what if he noticed B. Kalimov? What's he going to do about it?
Yeah.
But seriously, in real life. Now, granted, like Somerset Maugham used to say, the only difference between reality and fiction is that fiction has to make sense. So in other words, the rules of fiction are, but you still have to answer the question. The bottom line is, though, what would he have done about that? There's no other choice but to go, it was what's he going to do? Is he going to go on a multi-year investigation of this? And, and when he finds nothing, then what? To me, that would just been wasted effort in the story. And old Morgan Scorpion has a great question, is basically, how would things have turned out differently if Dawn would have been more attentive to his danger? He would have been killed sooner. Or he would have killed. The only thing keeping him alive in the entire story is because she's basically his personal Jesus.
Yeah, that's right.
If he would have, or something other unpleasantness. See, that's the thing. It's not binary. What else could they have done? They could have just pulled the masks off early and said, "Oh, okay, we'll stop making Swiss cheese of your brain. You'll know everything that's going on all the time and still be able to do nothing about it." How will you like that? Charles Dexter Ward. I mean, there's all these characters that kind of had a clear idea of what was going on, and did it profit them? Was Mickey Rourke profited in knowing that that Robert De Niro's Satan, or that he was really Johnny Favorite? Sorry, spoilers.
Yeah.
No, nothing. It never. Knowing this stuff just fucks up your life even worse. So the answer is, things would have been far worse for him to have figured it out. Actually.
Wow. Okay. Ignorance is bliss, or at least longevity.
But was he gonna get a shotgun and solve it by shooting more, a bunch of cultists? Or
if Bruce Willis had been cast as Don Miller, yes, it would. Yes, it would have.
He would have blown some shit up.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Point well taken. I do think that the relationship between Dawn and Michelle is fascinating, and the fact that she kept she spends a good bit of the book, the storyline, trying to keep him alive, keep him out of trouble. And even though she's been transformed, really seriously transformed, at least since 1980, it seems that that core part of her that loves him, if she ever did really love him, unless it was just she's leading him on because he would be convenient to her for some reason, or the Children of Old Leech want, or Bronson Ford wants to keep him in, close to him, keep his enemy close because he wants to get back at this lineage of the Millers or whatever.
Sure.
It does really seem like she loves him, though. Like that piece of her is still there.
Yeah, there's people who have the pet rat or the tarantula that they don't really like them that much, but they kind of are fond of them and take them out occasionally and treat them nicely. So yeah.
Very good. Let me see. There is a.
She had a lot on the line too. I mean, I don't want to go too deep, but I mean, it wasn't as if there wasn't some enlightened self-interest going on. They had basically set her up, like, oh, okay, that we want this out of him. And as I've developed the mythology a little more in stories since then, that the Millers go, and also in that at the start of the Croning, but the Millers have been kind of had an antagonistic relationship with the Cult of the Leech for a long time.
Yes, that's right. I think the two words here, dolmen and croning, are really interesting. Dolmen, in particular, the fact that it's also called a portal tomb. I wonder if that maybe that phrase, I just why a dolmen, especially when there are none in North America, and
that's why.
Is that it? Okay. But the fact that it's also known as a portal tomb, that's a fascinating phrase there, and that of course speaks to kind of the nature of at least some of the dolmens that show up here.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's nothing too complicated. It's it would be less interesting if I had set the story in, Europe somewhere where they're more prevalent. I like the idea though that you'll see that in a lot of my stories, things that don't belong in the area that they're in. But the idea being that there's no different, that basically you could just step from one place to another, down a hole, fall upward. This idea of co-location in a very sinister way. You're like, what does one of the characters say? The dark is only as far away as your closet.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And then the croning, I didn't realize that's like a real kind of ritual.
I got that from actually, you know what? Because this is probably pretty important, especially since it was Michael Shea's birthday a couple days ago.
Yeah.
The idea for this whole thing, all of it, was the seed happened 2006 or so. I was at World Horror Convention in San Francisco, and I went to lunch with Michael Shea and Linda Shea, and we went to this. It was like it was basically like a Spanish mission kind of restaurant. It was like, but it had stuff from Ireland in it. It was really interesting. We sat there and we had lunch, and Linda was telling me about, I can't remember if she had done it or a friend did it, but basically they were hired to photograph a croning.
Oh my goodness.
And she explained to me just very briefly what it was. I went home and did a bunch of research on it, but that's where it started. We sat there and said, I got to write about that. And I was just going to write a short story about a croning. And I want to say that they actually were telling me, like, they had mentioned something about a Walmart ghost too. There was like so you have the department store story about the witch. Michael had told me very briefly, it was different, but it was very briefly, he had mentioned something about he or somebody else kept seeing something haunting, like when they were cleaning up at night, creeping around the store. And I just ran with, I was like, oh, that's a great idea for a story or a chapter in the story. But so the Shays, even though the story ended up really having very little to do with anything like that, that was just that conversation we had that day was where I got the idea for the croning.
Wow. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Last question I'll ask about the croning, and this is a really small one, but Boris the cat has actually gotten quite a bit of attention. It's such a strange, there's just really one little passage in which Boris is mentioned, and it's where Holly will not go down into the basement, I think it is, because she swore that once when she ventured down to fetch a jar of preserves, the venerable tomcat Boris, whom they'd inherited along with the house, had chuckled from his perch high up on a wine rack and crooned, "I'm a good kitty." Boris wandered off one day not long after that alleged incident.
You kind of wonder if Boris had a last name, don't you? But that actually happened. That's a real world anecdote.
Okay, I was wondering if there was a backstory to that.
And when Michelle was talking about, I think it was Michelle talking about, I can't remember. It's been my mind Swiss cheese. There's a scene in the story though where the characters are talking about the other character's head floating in the closet. That was also a real world anecdote, and they both happened to my ex-wife. And all I'll say about the kitty is just that I was the typical, go back to Blumhouse, annoying white male husband. Like, honey, I'm not saying you're crazy. I'm not saying that you're just overworked. I believe you. I don't, you're not going mad. Because she kept telling me all this weird stuff. And I was like, okay, all right. You heard something. Then I heard something one time and I went, oh, shiza. So she had gone down into the laundry room at the place where she had a room and a big old house. And I met the cat. Not named Morris, and she was down there doing something, and the cat was on the steps above her. It was one of those long flights of cellar type stairs, and it's hollow underneath. You could reach between. Somebody could reach and grab you by the ankle if they wanted to. And she said she heard the cat, looked at the cat. She was putting the laundry away, and she goes, "Good kitty," and she heard a voice right where the cat was go, "Good kitty," just like that, and it just scared the living crap out of her. So I had to put that. I had to put that in the novel.
Oh, that's awesome. I do wonder within the context. Thank you for sharing that. That's a great story. I do wonder within the context of the novel, like if this is Boris the cat, there's another Boris who shows up in this, Boris Kalamov. Is this like somehow Boris, who's in the form of a cat or a familiar. Okay, so just a coincidence that he's named Boris.
I do that a lot. I
Okay.
love to have names that repeat, characters that almost are the same, some that are the same character. I will say this though, the cat, that whole thing. There's a lot of stuff going on in the house that easily could have been, the activity, the cosmic horror activity that was occurring. I also like blending the idea that hauntings might actually be cosmic horror occurrences, as opposed to like more banal, like, oh, it's just Uncle, the ghost of the cat had something to say, or there's somebody from beyond, benevolent or at least benign saying something. I like the idea that sometimes that could just be, they're like much darker than you think.
Yes. Fascinating. Well, thank you. You've spent a lot of time talking with us, and I know there were more questions that kind of came up throughout the threads, but I really appreciate you spending so much time with us. As we wrap up things, a couple of things that I'd just like to mention. If folks who are on the watching on YouTube have not joined us on the Laird Barron subreddit, please go ahead and join us over there. We are about to launch into Swift to Chase. Got several, all those stories that we're going to cover over the next few weeks. And then make sure that if you haven't already, that you pre-order Laird's new collection, Not a Speck of Light. If you go out to the Bad Hand Books website and order it there, I think they still have some copies available that'll have a signed book plate by Laird. So there's a link in there for that. And also on September 8th, I will be hosting Laird and Brian Evanson. We'll be talking about the end of the world with Laird and Brian, because on September 10, both their new horror collections are both coming out on that day. So real excited about that. And Laird, I don't know if you've been if you had done a joint interview with Brian or not, but I think it'll be a great chance to get the two of you guys together to.
I look forward to it. He's one of my favorite conversation.
Yeah,
one of my favorite writers.
You're the one who turned me on to his work to begin with, so definitely excited about that. And John, hey man, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us about
my great pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's
absolutely.
It's funny. I was in the build up to this. I realized I had written a review of the Croning for the LA Review of Books back in 2012, and it's still up there. And I was looking it over, and I thought, man, this is as true now as it was then.
Wow.
The Croning's a great book, and I think that it as we were saying before, I think those first 5 books formed their own kind of little pentagon there. And obviously there's everything kind of connects to everything else. It's not to say that they're completely separate from what comes after, but they are remarkably coherent. And yeah, that Walmart chapter is that's one of the scariest damn things I think I've ever read. It really the whole book holds up. And there's something, where, and it's odd. It kind of reminds me in a strange way of Fred Chappell's novel Dagon. But like part of the reason the Croning works is because of Don and Michelle. If you don't have Don and Michelle, it doesn't work. But you frame it through the lens of that marriage. You have something that is particularly successful, as it's like Ingmar Bergman meets H.P. Lovecraft or something like that,
Wow. Yeah, totally. I've heard people reference like around 2006, 2010, somewhere in that period, as being kind of the new wave of cosmic horror. And I'm seeing like John Langan and Laird Barron, in particular, those two names coming up as being like part of that wave that's kind of revitalized cosmic horror in particular, and I guess horror more broadly. Would you say, having been one of those writers doing that, does that sound accurate?
I feel like it does. Like, I absolutely, like, if you say that for Laird, I absolutely. And look, cosmic horror is not the only thing Laird has done. You know, there were stories like the Lagerstadt or even the Redfield Girls, right? Which it's a ghost story. It's an incredibly sad and really sort of like heart stabbing ghost story, you know. But I do think that Laird was absolutely one of the people who opened up cosmic horror in some really, really interesting kinds of ways. I can't speak to myself. I didn't see myself as engaged with it in the same way, which is not to say I wasn't, just I didn't see it. But, you know, Laird, we mentioned Gemma Files. You know, there's certainly writers like that I think were absolutely like, hey, we've got all this stuff. Let's see what we can do with it.
And then not long after that, you start seeing the giants like Matthew Bartlett, you know, S.P. Mikowski, Olivia Llewellyn.
Yeah.
They were all around that time or at least within a few years.
Yeah, it's true, right?
I'm talking about cosmic horror. I'm not talking about just horror writers. I mean,
yeah.
Darren Spiegel. There was Cody Goodfellow. Cody Goodfellow was actually right at the same time was doing stuff. Jeff Thomas.
Yeah.
Like the minute I sign off, I can give you 100. I'll start thinking, there's 100. So there were a lot of people. Jeff Vandermeer was doing work. So, but Jeff Thomas is actually one of the ones that gets slept on a lot. Willem Pugmire was active. So yeah, I mean there were people. I think that maybe because I was in and John we were in magazine, fantasy, and science fiction, and also sci fiction with Ellen Datlow. That I think it might have like brought some attention to it, but people were already Don Webb. They were already Michael Shea. Michael Shea had not given up writing. He did the Grolem, right? The
Grolem, yeah.
So I think it's more along the lines of it was just, you know, for my case, I was really new, and that's how the field works. Like, this guy with the patch, he's right. Like, what's he up to? And then, like, you know, meanwhile, Michael Shea's like, hey, I got the Grolem over here. What the hell, man? And that's the thing. That's the thing is that don't call it a comeback. That nobody, you know, there were a lot of people that were doing stuff. I just feel that not everybody was getting in to magazine, fantasy, and science fiction.
Yeah.
And or Ellen wasn't able to publish as many people. And so and then what happens right after that, around 2010, small presses really took off. And that opened the floodgates to Scott Nicolay. And like I said, Matthew Bartlett is, you know, all over the place all of a sudden. And I think there was a lot of people working in parallel.
Yes. John, before we go, what do you have coming up?
I'm writing a novel. It's going to take a while, but I'm hoping maybe to have a collection of stories out next year.
Very good.
So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I'm just still writing away. There's a bunch of different things, kind of maybe happening that I can't really talk about, which is really obnoxious to say. I know.
No.
But
read between the lines there. That's great to hear.
So my career in stand-up comedy is finally taking off. So
you got that Netflix special coming, or
exactly. It's just me and Laird is heckling me the entire time. Laird and Paul Tremblay are just heckling me the entire time.
Yes.
Yeah, Michael Sisko too shows up in his persona. Yeah,
nice, awesome. Well, thank you both so much. Real excited for Not a Speck of Light to come out, and we are launching into Swift to Chase starting this week. So anyway, everyone have a great weekend. Thanks everyone who stayed with us through two and a half hours now. Appreciate it very much. John, happiest of birthdays to you, and
thank you.
See you guys all. Hopefully on we'll see a lot of folks on Laird's Patreon, but around on socials in general. And Edward, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks
guys.
everyone. We'll see you. Take care, everybody.